They didn't warn her. Nobody warned her. One moment, Elena Mercer had her hands inside a stranger's chest cavity, fingers pressed against a rupture the size of her thumb, blood soaking through her scrubs to her skin. And the next moment, the double doors of Mercy General's trauma bay exploded inward, and three men with automatic weapons walked through them like they owned the building. The tallest one pressed his gun against Dr. Harold Finch's temple. "Stop working on him," the man said. Calm, completely calm. Like he was asking someone to lower the thermostat. Finch dropped his suture kit without a single word of protest. If you've ever wondered what you would do in that moment, if your hands would keep moving or if fear would root you to the floor, then you need to stay with this story. Because Elena Mercer found out the hard way exactly what kind of person she was, and it cost her everything. If this story already has you holding your breath, hit that like button, drop your city in the comments below, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. These stories travel farther than I ever imagined, and I want to know exactly how far. Part 1. The rain had been falling since noon. By 9:30 that night it had turned mean, not the soft Chicago drizzle that locals ignored, but the kind that came horizontal off the lake and found every gap in your collar, every crack in a windowsill. Elena had driven to work in it, parked 3 blocks away because the hospital lot was full as always, and arrived at her shift with her hair plastered flat against her face and her sneakers soaked through. She'd worked 31 hours in the last 2 days. She hadn't told anyone that. You didn't say things like that out loud at Mercy General because someone would always point out that the ER was short-staffed, and wasn't it lucky she was already here? She'd eaten half a granola bar sometime around 4 in the afternoon. She couldn't remember which pocket she'd put the other half in. The trauma bay at 9:45 was the particular kind of loud that ER veterans learned to filter, the beeping that mattered versus the beeping that didn't, the voice that meant a situation was under control versus the voice climbing toward panic. Elena moved through it on autopilot, checking her last patient's IV line, annotating the chart, calculating in the back of her mind whether she could get 15 minutes to find a chair before the next ambulance. She was still calculating when the radio at the nurse's station crackled. Multiple GSW inbound, ETA 4 minutes. Patient is male, mid-40s, minimum 4 entry wounds, 2 chest, 1 abdomen, 1 left thigh, BP dropping, conscious but deteriorating, 4 gunshot wounds. Elena pulled on fresh gloves. The ambulance didn't arrive in 4 minutes. It arrived in 2, which meant the paramedics had been moving faster than they'd told dispatch, which meant the situation inside that vehicle was worse than the radio had conveyed. Elena knew this the way she knew her own heartbeat. She was already positioned at the bay doors when they rolled back. She saw the blood first. The gurney was soaked. The paramedic closest to the patient, a young guy named Marcus, who Elena had worked with 100 times, had both hands pressed into the man's chest and was leaning his full body weight down, and still the blood was finding ways around his palms. "Lost pressure twice on the way in," Marcus said. "Brought him back both times. He keeps trying to talk." Elena looked at the patient. He was large, even horizontal and gray with blood loss. She could see he was powerfully built, the kind of man who took up space by nature rather than effort. His dress shirt had been cut open, the fabric expensive even in ruins. One arm hung off the edge of the gurney. His eyes were half open, not unconscious, watching. She didn't know who he was yet. That came later. In the moment, she only registered what her training demanded she register: airway, breathing, circulation, catastrophic hemorrhage. She moved in beside Marcus and took the chest wound without being asked, pressing her hands over his and feeling the terrible warmth of it. "Someone call Finch," she said. "I need the attending in here." "Finch is coming," said Dara, the charge nurse, moving in from the left with the crash cart. "He's finishing a consult." The man on the gurney made a sound, not quite a word. Elena glanced at his face. "Hey," she said. "Stay with me. What's your name?" His lips moved. Nothing came out. "Okay, that's okay. Don't try to talk. We're going to take care of you." His right hand, the one hanging off the gurney, moved toward her wrist. She felt the fingers close around it. Weak grip, shaking, but deliberate. She didn't pull away. "I've got you," she said. "You hear me? I've got you." Dr. Harold Finch appeared in the doorway at the same moment the bay doors opened from the other direction. Elena didn't see the men come in immediately. She was focused on the chest wound, on the rhythm of pressure and release, on the patient's dropping oxygen saturation. She heard Dara's sharp intake of breath. She heard the sound of equipment clattering, someone backing into a tray. She heard underneath all of it the click of a weapon being drawn. Then the tall man spoke. "Stop working on him." She looked up. 3 men. Tactical clothing under open jackets. The one who'd spoken had a clean, ordinary face, the kind of face that belonged behind a desk, not behind a gun. And he held his weapon against Finch's head with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before and expected the same outcome every time. Finch went still. His hands were already coming down before the sentence finished. "Step away from the patient," the man said to the room. Dara backed up 2 steps. Marcus, who had just fought for 20 minutes in a moving ambulance to keep this man's heart beating, put his hands up. Elena did not move. The man's eyes came to her. "You, step away." She looked at him. She looked at the gun. She looked at the patient on the gurney, whose blood was now moving freely beneath her hands without the pressure she'd been applying. "If I step away," she said, "he dies in under 3 minutes. That's the idea." Something crystallized in Elena's chest, not courage exactly. She didn't have time to feel courageous. It was more like clarity. A door closing on one set of options and leaving only one hallway. "Then you're going to have to shoot me," she said, "because I'm not moving." The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. It felt longer. The man tilted his head slightly, reassessing. He hadn't expected pushback, she could see that. People in this building responded to guns the way people everywhere responded to guns, which was immediately and completely. A nurse who held her ground was not part of the script. "You don't know who you're protecting," he said. "Right now he's a patient," Elena said. "That's all I need to know." The patient on the gurney, the man whose name she still didn't know, made that sound again. A low, broken attempt at language. His fingers found her wrist for the second time and she felt the grip tighten slightly. Weaker than before, but present. Holding on. The gunman stepped forward. He moved the weapon away from Finch and pointed it directly at Elena. She had an honest, physical experience of fear in that moment. Her stomach dropping, her knees trying to buckle, her body sending signals her brain overrode. She felt sweat on her upper lip. She felt the granola bar in her pocket pressing against her hip. She thought absurdly about the other half she'd never eaten. She kept her hands pressed into the wound. "Lady," the gunman said, quiet now, almost respectful. "Last chance." The overhead lights went out. All of them, simultaneously. The trauma bay dropped into the thin red emergency glow of the backup system, and in that sudden lurching change in visibility, everything happened at once. The second gunman shouting something near the doors, the sound of a collision she couldn't locate, Finch scrambling sideways, Dara screaming. Elena didn't run. She leaned over the patient, covering him with her own body in some animal calculation that surprised her later when she thought about it, and she felt rather than saw the chaos break around her. 3 gunshots. Not in the room, in the corridor. The sound ricocheted through tile and metal, and then there was running, heavy boots, shouting that faded down the hallway. When the backup light steadied and Elena raised her head, 2 of the 3 men were gone. The third, the one who'd spoken to her, was on the floor near the doorway. Not shot. A nurse named Phil, 61 years old, 20 pounds overweight, and apparently possessed of the specific madness that blooms in people when someone threatens a patient in his building, had hit the man across the back of the knees with a crash cart handle and sat on him. Phil was still sitting on him. "I've got this guy," Phil said, breathing hard. "Someone call security." Elena turned back to the patient. He was worse. The lapse in pressure had cost them. His blood pressure on the monitor was a number that made her jaw tighten. She got her hands back into position and raised her voice. "Finch, now! I need you here right now!" Finch appeared at her shoulder. His hands were shaking, but he got them into gloves and he got them into position, and she felt the difference immediately. 2 sets of hands, proper force, the bleeding slowing to something manageable from something catastrophic. "Ore is being cleared," Dara said, already on the phone. 2 minutes. "He doesn't have 2 minutes," Elena said. "Call it 30 seconds and mean it." She looked down at the patient. His eyes were open, fully open now, and focused on her face with an intensity that was startling in a man this close to dying. Not the glassy, searching look she usually saw at this stage, but something deliberate, specific, He was looking at her the way someone looks at a thing they're trying to memorize. "I've still got you," she said. "Lower this time, just for him. You understand? I'm not going anywhere." His eyes moved from her face to the badge clipped at her shoulder. He read it. She watched him read it. Then his eyes came back to her face, and something shifted in them, some last effort of will, and his lips formed 3 words. She couldn't hear them over the noise. She leaned closer. "Find," he said. "The nurse." And then his eyes closed. They moved him to the OR in 40 seconds, not 30, because the elevator was slow and the orderly pushing the gurney clipped a corner. Elena ran alongside with her hands still in position until the OR doors required her to stop. She stood in the hallway. Her scrubs were soaked through with someone else's blood. Her hands, stripped of gloves now, were pruned and red. Somewhere in the last 12 minutes, she had lost the other half of her granola bar. Dr. Finch came out of the OR prep room and stood beside her. "You know who that is?" he said. It wasn't a question. "He's a patient," Elena said. "Elena." Finch pulled off his cap. He was 54 years old with the face of a man who had seen things he wished he hadn't. "That's Lucian Voss." The name landed. She'd heard it. Of course she'd heard it. Everyone in Chicago had heard it, the same way everyone had heard of bad weather and city hall corruption and the deep cold that came in off the lake in February. Lucian Voss was the architecture of a certain kind of fear. The name attached to stories that circulated in the kind of bars she didn't go to, in the kind of neighborhoods where ambulances responded slowly. She looked at the OR doors. "Is he going to make it?" "I don't know." Finch hesitated. "There are people who would consider it a public service if he didn't." "There are people who consider a lot of things," Elena said. "That's not what I asked." She found a chair in the hallway and sat in it. Her body was only now beginning to register what it had been through. The trembling in her hands, the ache across her shoulders from the sustained pressure, the headache building behind her eyes. She sat with her elbows on her knees and her head down, and she breathed. Phil came around the corner 20 minutes later with a cup of coffee and a look of tremendous satisfaction. "Police took our guy," he said. "Security held the corridor. Nobody else got to the patient." "Good." She took the coffee. "Phil, you sat on an armed man." "Well," he thought about it. "The cart handle did the real work." She laughed. She hadn't expected to, and it came out ragged and too loud, and she covered her mouth with one hand, and Phil patted her on the shoulder once and left her to it. The OR doors didn't open for 4 hours. When the surgeon came out, he looked at Elena, the only one still in the hallway, with an expression she had learned to read years ago. "He made it," the surgeon said. "Barely. He's in a coma. Might stay that way." He paused. The chest wound nicked the aorta. If someone had stepped back from that table when those men came in, he would have bled out before we got him upstairs. Elena nodded. She didn't say anything. She finished the cold coffee and dropped the cup in a trash can and walked back to the nurse's station to finish her shift. She didn't know that Lucian Voss, in the 42 seconds between the elevator and the OR doors, had opened his eyes one final time. She didn't know that he had spent those 42 seconds committing exactly 2 things to memory: the color of her eyes, which he would later describe to 7 different people as the particular green of a streetlight after rain, and the name stitched in blue thread on the badge at her shoulder. She didn't know that those 2 things would, 6 months later, reshape both their lives completely. She walked back to the nurse's station and picked up the next chart. Outside, the rain kept falling. 6 months is a long time to watch a man breathe. That was how the night nurses described it among themselves. Not clinically, not with the detachment the job was supposed to build in you, but with the particular exhaustion of people who had watched Lucian Voss lie motionless in room 4 North for 173 days and had started, despite everything they knew about who he was, to root for him the way you root for something stubborn and improbable. A late frost surviving into April, a cracked tooth that somehow doesn't abscess. He breathed, that was all. The machines confirmed it in green lines and rhythmic beeping. His chest rose and fell. His hands lay at his sides, still as wood, and the nurses turned him every 4 hours to prevent pressure wounds, and the neurologist came twice weekly and said the same things in the same order, and the men stationed at the end of the corridor, 3 of them, rotating in 8-hour shifts, never the same face twice, watched the door and said nothing to anyone. Elena wasn't one of the nurses who watched him breathe. She wasn't in the building at all. The letter had come on a Tuesday, 6 days after the shooting, on hospital stationery with the CMO's signature at the bottom, in the kind of heavy ink that meant the decision had been made before the letter was typed. Effective immediately. Performance concerns. Failure to follow established security protocol. Conduct unbecoming. Conduct unbecoming. She'd read that phrase 4 times, standing in her kitchen in wet socks, the letter in one hand and the refrigerator door hanging open behind her because she'd been reaching for the orange juice when the mail slot clattered. She read it a 4th time, and then she set the letter on the counter and closed the refrigerator and stood very still for approximately 2 minutes. Then she called the nurses' union. The union rep, a compact, permanently tired woman named Grace, who had fought 17 wrongful termination cases in the past 4 years, listened to the full story without interrupting and then said, "Elena, I'm going to be straight with you. They have the security footage from the bay." "Good," Elena said. "That footage shows me keeping a patient alive. It shows you refusing a direct order from an attending physician to step back from a patient during an active security incident." Grace paused. "Finch is backing the hospital's position." Silence. "Finch," Elena said. "He submitted a statement 2 days ago. Says he gave you a clear directive and you refused." Elena sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically. Her legs just decided they were done holding her up, and she folded into the cabinet below the sink and sat on the cold tile with her back against the wood. "Finch was the one who dropped his suture kit," she said, "the moment that gun came out." "I know. He didn't give me any directive." He put his hands up. "I know that too." Grace's voice was careful, even. "But his statement is in writing and yours isn't yet. And the hospital's legal team filed their documentation before the union was notified, which means they planned this," Elena said. Grace didn't answer immediately, which was itself an answer. "How fast can they move?" Elena asked. "They already moved. Your credentials are flagged in the state system. Nothing formal yet. They're calling it an administrative hold pending review, but any hospital that runs your license number in the next 30 to 90 days is going to see that flag, and they are going to decline to hire you until it resolves." Grace exhaled. "Elena, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to fight this, but I need you to understand what you're walking into." Elena looked at the letter on the counter above her. Conduct unbecoming. "Who told them to do this?" she said. "The CMO's office." "Who told the CMO?" Another pause, longer this time. "The hospital received a significant donation 4 days after the incident, anonymous, routed through a foundation." Grace's voice dropped. "I'm not supposed to know that." "But you do." "I do." Elena pressed the back of her head against the cabinet door. Above her, the refrigerator hummed. Outside, someone's car alarm went off and silenced itself after 3 seconds. "So someone paid the hospital," she said, "to fire the nurse who saved the man they tried to kill." "I can't say that." "I'm not asking you to say it. I'm saying it." She stood up. Her knees ached. "Grace, what do I do?" "Right now, nothing. You let me file the response and you stay quiet and you don't contact anyone at the hospital and you especially do not go near that patient." Grace's voice sharpened. "Elena, I mean it. You go near him and they will use it to make the conduct charge stick permanently." "I understand." "Do you?" "Yes," Elena said. "I understand completely." She didn't go near him. The first month she spent filing paperwork, attending meetings in Grace's cramped union office, and scanning job boards with a specific sick feeling in her stomach that was new to her. The feeling of a door she'd assumed was open, turning out to have been locked for some time. The flag on her license was quiet, but total. She called 4 hospitals in the first week. All 4 ran her credentials, and she could hear the shift in the recruiter's voice the moment the system returned results. A slight pulling back, a verbal straightening, and then some variation of "we'll be in touch" that meant they wouldn't be. She picked up 2 private duty shifts through a medical staffing agency that didn't check credentials the way hospitals did. The pay was half what she'd been making. She took it. The second month she stopped calling hospitals and started calculating. Her rent was $1,400. Her student loans, the ones she'd been methodically reducing for 9 years, were $412 a month. Her car needed a timing belt that she kept postponing. She had $700 in savings, which felt like a fact about someone else's life when she looked at her bank statement. She called her mother once, on a Sunday afternoon, and told her work was slow. Her mother, who was 71 and lived in a narrow house in Elgin and believed that troubles were survivable if you didn't speak them aloud, said that was fine. Things went in cycles. Did Elena need money? Elena said no. She meant yes. She didn't take it. Oh, the underground clinic was Dara's fault. Dara, her charge nurse from the trauma bay, the one who had backed up 2 steps when the guns came out, and then immediately, the moment the corridor cleared, called 3 senior surgeons and coordinated the OR prep in under 90 seconds, had found Elena's number in her personal phone and called on a Thursday evening in month 2. I heard what happened, Dara said, with your license. Word gets around. This place is the size of a small town and everyone gossips. Listen, I know somewhere that needs a nurse. No credential check, no formal employment, cash under the table, and before you say anything, where? Dara hesitated. It's not exactly a clinic. Dara. It operates out of the basement of a community center on the west side. Dr. Amara Osei runs it. You might know the name. She used to be at Northwestern before she retired. About 62 now, still sharp as anything. They see roughly 40 to 60 patients a week. People who can't afford care and won't go to an ER because of immigration status or warrants or just plain fear. She paused. They need someone who can handle trauma cases. Elena looked around her apartment. The timing belt estimate was sitting on her counter next to the letter about her credentials. What time should I be there? She said. Well, she started the following Monday, and she did not stop. The basement clinic was 3 rooms partitioned with curtain tracks, 2 examination tables, 1 autoclave that made a sound like a small animal in distress every time it cycled, and Dr. Amara Osei, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and had the particular manner of a person who had decided, at some point decades ago, that fear was an unaffordable luxury and had simply stopped carrying it. They worked alongside each other without much conversation for the first 2 weeks. Osei observed. Elena worked. The patients came in with things that made Elena's hands move fast and her mind go quiet the way it did in the trauma bay. Knife wounds dressed with whatever was available. Infections that had been left too long. Fractures badly set or not set at all. One man who arrived with a piece of rebar still in his thigh and made no sound whatsoever while Elena removed it, which frightened her more than screaming would have. At the end of the 3rd week, Osei looked at Elena across an examination table where they'd just spent 40 minutes saving someone's foot and said, "What did they fire you for?" Elena told her. Osei listened with her arms crossed. When Elena finished, the older woman was quiet for a moment. "The man you saved," Osei said. "Lucien Voss." Elena looked at her. "I know who he is," Osei said evenly. "Half the people in this neighborhood know who he is. Some of them have lost people to his organization." She tilted her head. "Some of them are alive because his organization kept other, worse things out. I didn't save him because of who he was." "No." Osei picked up her chart. "I know. That's why I'm asking." Elena didn't have a clean answer. She understood that Osei wasn't looking for one. She went back to work. Month 4 was when things started to move. She had a rhythm by then. 3 mornings a week at the clinic, 2 evenings of private duty nursing, 1 full day managing the paperwork of her ongoing credential dispute, and the rest of the time in an apartment that had developed a specific quality of quiet she didn't like. She'd stopped watching television somewhere around month 2. She read. She ran, in the cold, along the lake, and stood at the water's edge sometimes with her hands in her jacket pockets and looked at the skyline and tried not to think about a man on a blood-soaked gurney and a pair of eyes trying to memorize her face. She thought about it anyway. She was on a Tuesday morning run when the car appeared. It was a black sedan, nothing distinctive, and it was parked on the path turnaround near the underpass, a place where cars didn't usually park because there was no good reason to be there. She noticed it the way she'd learned to notice things that didn't belong, which was without slowing, without looking directly, just a peripheral registering and a slight shift in her breathing. She ran past it, the door opened behind her. She heard the footsteps before she processed the decision, and then she was running. Not jogging, running, arms driving, her breath punching out in white clouds in the cold air, and the footsteps were faster than she'd anticipated, and she made it about 60 yards before a hand closed on her shoulder. She spun and drove her elbow hard into the person's face. The man stumbled. Not a large man, lean, in a gray coat, mid-30s, nose now bleeding freely. He put both hands up and said rapidly, "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm an employee. I'm a representative." "Of who?" Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. The man lowered one hand and pressed the other against his nose. He looked at her with watering eyes and something that was very close to respect. "Mr. Voss," he said. "He's awake." She did not go. She stood in her apartment that evening with the man's card on the table in front of her and the number written on it in clean, undecorated print. No name, just the number. And she did not call it. She thought about Grace's voice on the phone. "You go near him, and they will use it." She thought about the flagged credential, the student loans, the 2 private duty shifts. She thought about a hand closing around her wrist on a blood-soaked gurney and the deliberate fading effort of a man trying to stay present long enough to memorize her face. She didn't call. She went to sleep. Lucien Voss, it emerged later, had been awake for 11 days before he sent anyone to find her. Those 11 days had been a specific kind of violence, though they'd looked calm from the outside. He'd woken without drama, no gasping, no cinematic return to consciousness. Just a slow gathering of information from a body that had been catastrophically damaged and had spent 6 months in a forced stillness that was its own kind of damage. He lay in the hospital bed and took inventory the way he'd always taken inventory, systematically, without sentiment, starting with what he knew for certain and working outward from there. He knew he was alive. He knew, from the quality of the silence and the composition of the security detail outside his door, that something had changed while he was out. He knew that he'd had a name before the darkness, 2 of them, and he reached for them the way you reach for something you set down carefully before sleeping, certain you'll find it in the same place. The nurse, Elena Mercer, and Vincent Doran, his underboss, who had visited him exactly once in 6 months, who stood at the foot of the bed for 10 minutes with a face arranged in the correct configuration of grief and relief, and whose left hand, Lucien noticed this from beneath eyelids he kept 3/4 closed, trembled slightly when he thought his employer was still unconscious. A man whose hand, when looking at a sleeping body, is a man with a reason to be afraid of that body waking up. Lucien had filed that information without expression and waited. He waited 4 more days. In those 4 days, he listened to the conversations of the nurses, the security rotation, and the 2 of his own soldiers who came in to report. He listened to what they said and to the specific texture of what they didn't say, the pauses, the careful constructions, the topics that were approached and then redirected. He built a picture. The picture was not good. 3 of his lieutenants had shifted allegiance in month 2. The West Side distribution network, the one that had taken him 7 years to build into something that ran without visible seams, had been restructured under a new management structure that Vincent had characterized to everyone as temporary and administrative. Money was moving in directions Lucien had not authorized. At least 2 men he trusted absolutely were not contactable. On day 4, he called Marcus, his head of operations, into the room alone. Marcus came in with the careful walk of a man entering a room where the floor might not hold. He was 60 years old, built like something assembled for durability, and he had worked for Lucien Voss for 22 years. He closed the door and stood at the foot of the bed and looked at his employer, who had lost 20 pounds and whose hands rested on the blanket like things placed there by someone else. "Tell me," Lucien said. Voice was rough from disuse. He didn't clear his throat. Marcus told him. It took 40 minutes. He spoke slowly and completely because he'd had 6 months to organize the information and because he'd made a decision somewhere around month 3 that when this moment came, he was going to tell the truth, regardless of what that meant. When Marcus finished, the room was quiet. "Vincent," Lucien said. It wasn't quite a question. "Vincent," Marcus confirmed. "How many?" "Of the inner circle? 3 firm. 2 more who are waiting to see how things fall." Lucien looked at the window. The Chicago skyline visible through the glass was the same skyline he'd looked at for 30 years, and it looked the same now as it always had, which was somehow the strangest part of all of this. "And the nurse," he said. "Elena Mercer." Marcus shifted. "We identified her 3 days after you were admitted. She was terminated by the hospital 6 days in. Her license has been flagged. She's been working at an unofficial clinic on the west side." "Who flagged the license?" The filing came from the hospital's legal department. The funding for the legal action traced back to a foundation that received an anonymous donation 4 days after the shooting. Marcus paused. The foundation's administrative board includes 2 names that connect to Vincent's financial structure. Something crossed Lucian's face. Not anger exactly. Something quieter and more total than anger. A closing of accounts. He fired her, Lucian said. He arranged for it, yes. Because she saved my life. Most likely she was also considered a potential witness. She was present in the room when the shooters entered. If she ever spoke to law enforcement about what she heard, she's a liability to him. Yes. Lucian was quiet for 30 seconds. His right hand moved slightly against the blanket, the hand that had found a nurse's wrist in a trauma bay and held on with what was left of his strength. Send someone to find her, he said, carefully, no pressure. Just find her and tell her I'm awake. And if she doesn't want to be found, then she doesn't want to be found. He looked at Marcus. I'm not Vincent. Marcus nodded and left. Lucien discharged himself on day 11 against the explicit written recommendation of 4 physicians, 3 of whom he suspected were reporting his condition to Vincent's people. He signed the forms with the hand that still worked fully and did not acknowledge the forms that he didn't sign. His transport was waiting in the service exit. He walked to it under his own power, which cost him considerably more than he let anyone see, and he sat in the back of the vehicle and looked out at the city moving past the window, and he thought about all the things that needed to happen now and the order in which they needed to happen. He had the list arranged in his mind by the time they reached the safe house. Elena Mercer was second on the list. The question of Vincent Doran was first. Elena was closing up the clinic on a Thursday evening in month 6, stacking supply boxes in the back room, while Ose locked the front when her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number. She almost didn't answer it. She'd developed a habit, in recent months, of not answering numbers she didn't recognize because numbers she didn't recognize had sometimes led to conversations with people from the hospital's legal team who spoke in careful, neutral tones and said things that made her stomach hurt. She answered on the 4th ring. Elena Mercer. A man's voice, low, damaged at the edges. Something wrong with it, she registered immediately, the specific roughness of vocal cords that hadn't been used in a long time. She knew. She didn't know how she knew. She had heard this voice for approximately 3 minutes in a trauma bay 6 months ago, and it had been barely a voice then, a rough attempt at sound from a man losing blood faster than she could manage. But she knew. Yes, she said. I understand, Lucien Voss said, that you didn't come when I sent someone. No, she agreed. I didn't. I'm not calling to pressure you. I called because there are things you should know, things that affect your safety. His breath was visible in the voice, careful, paced, a man managing pain with the practiced discipline of someone who'd been doing it for some time. I also called because I owe you a debt. I don't know how to. You don't owe me anything, Elena said. That's not how it works. I understand that's how it works for you. A pause. It doesn't work that way for me. She leaned against the supply shelf. Above her, the single bare bulb in the back room hummed at a frequency that had been getting on her nerves for weeks. What do you mean, my safety? She said. Vincent Doran, my underboss. His voice had no emotion in it now, just the information. The shooting, the ambush that night. He arranged it. He's been running the organization in my absence. He was responsible for the action taken against your employment. He considers you a witness who can put him at the scene of a murder attempt against me. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. He hasn't moved on you yet, Lucien continued. I believe that's because moving on, you would draw attention he can't afford while the transition of power is still in process. But that window is closing. In my estimation, you have 1 to 2 weeks before he decides you're more dangerous alive than the attention is costly. The bare bulb hummed. Why are you telling me this? Elena said. Because you kept me alive. You said that's not how it works for me. I know. His voice dropped slightly. But it's how it works for me. I'm telling you because you need to know. What you do with it is your choice. She heard something in the background on his end. A door, a murmured voice, some quality of space that suggested a large room. He was somewhere she didn't know, being someone she didn't know. and calling her with information she couldn't verify and didn't entirely disbelieve. "I need to think," she said. "All right. Don't send anyone else to my running route." A pause. "Fair. I'll call you," she said. "This number?" "This number." She hung up. Osei appeared in the doorway with her coat on and her bag over her shoulder and her reading glasses up on her head. And she looked at Elena with the calm, diagnostic attention of a woman who had been reading rooms for 6 decades. "You look like someone just told you the building is on fire," Osei said. "Something like that," Elena said. She locked the supply room and turned off the light and followed Osei up the stairs. She called the number back at 2:17 in the morning. He answered on the first ring, which told her something. He'd been awake, waiting, which told her something else, and she filed it without deciding what it meant yet. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. "I want to be clear about something. I make my own decisions. I'm not walking into whatever this is because I'm scared. I'm walking into it because I've been making calculated decisions my whole life, and this one makes sense to me right now. The moment it stops making sense, I leave. You understand that?" A breath. "Yes. And if you're wrong about the timeline, if I'm not actually in danger, I'm not wrong." His voice was so level when he said it that she almost said "I know" back, which surprised her enough that she didn't say anything for a moment. "Where do you want to meet?" she said. The car was outside her building in 20 minutes. She was packed in 15 because she'd been half-packed since month 2, which was something she hadn't admitted to herself until she was pulling the bag from the closet and found she already knew exactly what was in it. She got in the car. The city moved past the windows, the late-night version of it, the version she'd driven through 100 times coming home from double shifts, and it looked the same as it always had, except that she was leaving it for a reason she couldn't fully articulate and moving towards something she couldn't clearly see. The driver didn't speak. After 20 minutes, the car turned off the main road and onto a private lane, and through the trees ahead, she saw the lights of a house she'd never seen before. And somewhere behind her, in the city she was leaving, a man named Vincent Doran sat in his office reviewing the week's intelligence reports. His assistant set a folder on his desk. Vincent opened it. The first page was a surveillance photograph taken 6 hours ago. Elena Mercer, outside the clinic on the west side, locking the door. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. "The nurse," he said when the call connected. "Move tonight." He hung up. 30 minutes later, his men arrived at Elena Mercer's apartment building. Her apartment was empty. The bag was gone from the closet. And in the kitchen, on the counter beside the refrigerator, a letter on hospital stationery with heavy ink at the bottom sat exactly where she'd left it 6 months ago. Conduct unbecoming. Except that now it was the only thing remaining in a space that had already stopped being hers. Part 2. Cuộc kích ban này được triển khai với dung lượng mục tiêu 4.000. 2. Bắt đầu trực tiếp từ điểm kết thúc của Part 1. Yêu cầu tập trung hoàn toàn vào cấu trúc mâu thuẫn leo thang, các mâu thuẫn nội bộ giữa các nhân vật phải bùng nổ, sự nghi ngờ tăng cao và những sai lầm trong quá khứ bắt đầu để lại hậu quả. Duy trì giống văn mỹ thô ráp, giàu cảm xúc, không sáo rỗng. Hãy kể theo ngôi thứ 3, tập trung vào những phản ứng bản năng nhất của con người, hơi thở dồn dập, những cái nhìn đầy sát khí và sự mệt mỏi rệu rã. Hội thoại phải chiếm ưu thế, mang tính đối đầu gay gắt, gãy gọn, không triết lý suông, đảm bảo liên tục xuất hiện cú twist hấp dẫn theo mạch truyền để gây sự tò mò, gay càn, xung đột mạnh diễn ra liên tục và cuốn hút để thu hút giữ chân người đọc. Triển khai chi tiết từng phân cảnh, scene by scene. Tuyệt đối không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng, tiêu đề phụ hay nhắc đến thực thể tôn giáo. Kết thúc phần này bằng một nút T-at kịch tính, The Point of No Return, khiến nhân vật không còn đường lui. Hãy trình bày trực tiếp trong tin nhắn, viết cực kỳ chi tiết từng hành động nhỏ. Nếu đặt giới hạn phản hồi trước khi đủ dung lượng, hãy dừng lại ở một câu rạng rỡ để tôi ra lệnh viết tiếp. Chỉ dần bắt buộc. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu nhằm mục đích giải trí, không dựa trên bất kỳ sự kiện hay nhân vật có thật nào. Lưu ý đặc biệt quan trọng, nếu đạt đến giới hạn trả lời, không được dùng giữa câu hay viết nốt câu đó hoàn chỉnh không mở rộng nội dung. Bắt buộc phải viết đủ số từ yêu cầu. Show more part 3. The house was not what she expected. She didn't know exactly what she'd expected, something that matched the mythology maybe, something that announced itself. Instead, the car pulled through a gate set into an ordinary stone wall, wound up a gravel drive through bare November trees, and stopped in front of a structure that looked like it had been built in the 1940s by someone with money and no interest in showing it. Wide porch, dark windows. The kind of house that looked smaller than it was because everything about it was designed to be underestimated. The driver opened her door without speaking. Elena got out with her bag over one shoulder and stood for a moment in the cold air, breathing it, letting her eyes adjust to the dark. The gravel was wet under her feet. Somewhere behind the tree line, the lake moved. She could hear it, a low, continuous sound like the building was breathing. The front door opened before she reached it. Lucian Voss was standing in the doorway. She had seen him horizontal and gray and soaked in his own blood. She had seen him with her hands inside his chest cavity and her full weight pressing down against a wound that was trying to kill him faster than she could manage. She had not seen him standing. He was taller than she'd reconstructed from those 40-odd minutes in the trauma bay. A full head taller than her, wide through the shoulders, though the 6 months in the coma had stripped weight from him in ways that showed in the hollows of his face and the way the doorframe seemed to hold more of his weight than it should. He'd shaved recently. He wore dark trousers and a gray shirt with the cuffs rolled to the elbow, and his left arm, the side with the thigh wound, carried a very slight favoring that she clocked immediately and filed. He looked at her the way she remembered from the gurney, like he was completing something. "You came," he said. "I said I would." She moved past him into the house, because standing in doorways in the cold was something she had no patience for at 2:40 in the morning. "You need to sit down. You're favoring your left side and you've been standing in that doorway long enough that your breathing has changed." He turned and looked at her. "Hello to you too," he said. "Hello." She set her bag down and looked at the room. High ceilings, a fire going, 3 men positioned at distances that told her they'd been briefed on her arrival. One of them was Marcus, whom she recognized from the brief chaos of the trauma bay. The other 2 she didn't know. "Which one of you is medically trained?" None of them moved. "Right," she said. "Where are the supplies?" Marcus showed her the medical kit, better stocked than she'd anticipated, which told her something about the level of violence this household considered routine. And she spent 20 minutes assessing Lucian's condition while he sat in a chair by the fire and submitted to it with the specific, contained impatience of a man who understood the necessity of a thing and resented it anyway. His wounds had been properly treated at the hospital, and the surgical work was competent. That wasn't the issue. The issue was 6 months of inactivity on a body that had been held together with sutures and luck, followed by a discharge that any reasonable physician would have refused to authorize. "You tore something here," she said, pressing 2 fingers carefully along his left side. She felt him tense. "Not badly, but you need to not be walking around more than necessary for the next 72 hours. "I'll take that under advisement." "It's not advice." She looked at him directly. "It's information. You do what you want with it. But if you push this injury before it stabilizes, you will be back on a table, and the next surgeon may not have my nurse on hand." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "Fair point," he said. She finished the assessment and recorded what she found in the small notebook she carried, because old habits were the ones that held when everything else went sideways. She capped the pen and looked at him. "Now," she said, "tell me everything." "So," he told her. Not all of it. She understood that there were layers she wasn't being given access to, and she accepted that the way she accepted most partial information, which was to note the gaps and file them for later. But the core of it he laid out with a precision that she found, despite herself, impressive. He spoke the way she moved through a trauma assessment. No wasted words, clear sequencing, no performance. Vincent Doran had been his second for 9 years. He'd built the relationship the way you built anything you expected to last, slowly, with testing and verification at every stage, with specific calculated increases in trust mapped against specific demonstrated reliability. He had been wrong, not about Vincent's capability. The man was genuinely talented, functionally brilliant in the specific way that organizational management required. He'd been wrong about what Vincent wanted, which turned out to be what Vincent had always wanted and had simply been waiting long enough to reach for. "The ambush," Elena said, "he arranged it. Through a third party, professional contractors. The shooters in the hospital were a different team. Those were his own people." The one sent to make sure you didn't survive the ER. Yes. She thought about the man with the ordinary face and the gun at Finch's temple, the calm in his voice when he'd told the room to step away. They were going to let me walk out of there, she said, if I'd stepped back. Probably. Lucien's voice was neutral. You were incidental to the operation. A witness, potentially, but low priority. The priority was making sure I didn't leave that room alive. But I didn't step back. No. So I became a loose end. You became someone Vincent wasn't sure what to do with. Killing a nurse in a hospital full of witnesses carries a different weight than other things. So he found a different way. His jaw tightened. He made a phone call. The hospital made a decision. Your career took the damage instead of your body. Elena looked at the fire. Efficient, she said. Vincent is efficient. It's one of the things I valued about him. The word valued landed in past tense with a specific finality. It's also why we don't have much time. He'll know by morning that you've left your apartment. He'll adjust his thinking. What does he think I know? He doesn't know what you heard in that trauma bay. That's the problem. From his perspective, the uncertainty is the danger. You could have heard one of his men say something identifying. You could have seen a face he'd rather you hadn't. He doesn't know, so he treats the risk as total. I didn't hear anything identifying, Elena said. The man who spoke to me? I could describe him. That's all. That's enough to make Vincent uncomfortable. Lucien looked at her. You're not here because I need a witness. I want you to understand that. Why am I here? The fire popped. One of the men across the room shifted his weight. Marcus, near the window, was looking carefully at a point on the floor. You kept me alive, Lucien said. Twice. In the trauma bay, and again in the 42 seconds between the bay and the OR doors, because you stayed alongside the gurney keeping pressure on a wound that would have opened if you'd let it go. He paused. And then someone took apart your life because of it, systematically, using money and institutional leverage, because that's the tool that leaves the least visible damage. His voice was quiet and absolutely even. I didn't arrange the ambush. I didn't fire you. But the chain of events that destroyed your career traces back to a decision made in my world. That lands on me. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said. Okay? I'm not going to argue about debt and responsibility at 3 a.m. I'm here. Let's figure out what comes next. What came next arrived faster than either of them planned. Marcus woke her at 5:45 with a knock on the door of the room she'd been given. Plain, clean, nothing unnecessary. And when she opened it, his face told her before his voice did. Vincent moved overnight, he said. He hit 2 of our locations on the south side. 3 men down. One of them was Torres. She didn't know who Torres was, but Marcus's voice on the name told her enough. How bad, she said. Bad enough that the remaining teams are going to want an answer by morning. They'll accept that Lucien is back and operational, or they'll start making their own decisions about which way to move. He paused. Some of them have families inside the organization. If Vincent offers protection, where's Lucien? He was up at 4. He's in the operations room. She pulled on her clothes and went down the hall. The operations room was a large space that had probably been a dining room in the house's original life, now cleared of everything except 2 tables pushed together, a wall of monitors, and Lucien standing with his back to the door looking at a map of the city that had been printed on a large sheet and marked up in red and black ink. He heard her come in. I told you to sleep, he said without turning. You told me a lot of things. She came to stand beside him at the table. The map was marked with locations she didn't know the significance of. Numbered points, lines of connection, areas circled in red that she assumed were bad news. Torres. He was quiet for a moment. 23 years, he had a daughter at DePaul. Elena said nothing. She looked at the map. Vincent is moving faster than I expected, Lucien said. He knows I'm out of the hospital. He's trying to consolidate before I can stabilize. His finger moved over the map without touching it, tracing something. If he secures the south side distribution structure, he cuts off the financial flow that keeps the remaining loyalists funded. Without that, I'm managing an organization that can't pay the people keeping it together. How long do you have before that happens? 72 hours, maybe less. What do you need? He turned to look at her. The question seemed to land oddly, like it wasn't one he'd been asked before in quite that way, without preamble or agenda. Just, What do you need? I need to make contact with Reyes, he said. He runs the east side. He's been neutral so far. Hasn't committed to Vincent, hasn't committed to me. If I can reach him before Vincent does, I might be able to hold enough of the structure together to hit back. Can you reach him? Not by phone. Vincent has people monitoring communications. If I call Reyes directly, Vincent knows about it before Reyes picks up. He looked back at the map. I need a physical meeting, which means I need to move, which means your left side is going to be a problem. Yes. She looked at the map for a moment, then she looked at him. I can drive, she said. He looked at her. Elena, you need to be mobile. You need someone with you who isn't one of your men, because your men are being watched, and I'm not. I don't exist in Vincent's threat architecture yet. I'm a loose end he was planning to clean up quietly, not a tactical asset. She held his gaze. And if something goes wrong medically, you need someone who knows what to do. Your men clearly don't. A muscle moved in his jaw. This isn't what I brought you here for, he said. I know what you brought me here for. She picked up her jacket from the chair where she'd dropped it coming in. But this is what's in front of us, so let's go. The meeting with Reyes happened in the parking structure of an office building on the east side at 7:20 in the morning in the particular gray half-light that fell between the concrete levels and made everyone look like they were underwater. Reyes was 50, compact, with the face of a man who had been keeping his own counsel for so long that the habit had become the architecture of his expression. He came with two men. Lucien came with Marcus and Elena, which was a deliberate calculation. The presence of a woman who was clearly not security communicated a specific kind of confidence, which was the kind that didn't feel the need to fill the space with soldiers. Reyes looked at Lucien the way people looked at things they'd been told were dead, taking inventory, checking the discrepancy between the report and the reality. You look terrible, Reyes said. I look alive, Lucien said, which is apparently surprising. Vincent said, I know what Vincent said. Lucien's voice didn't rise. It did something more effective, which was to go very quiet and very specific. I need to know where you are. Reyes looked at Elena. Who's this? The nurse kept me breathing. She's with me. Reyes looked at her for another moment with an expression she couldn't fully read, then looked back at Lucien. Vincent's been making promises. I know. Good promises. Structure, protection, expansion into... He's partnering with the Maran group, Lucien said. Reyes went still. Trafficking, Lucien continued. Human. The narcotics expansion is the front. It's what he's been telling people. The real structure is transit. Moran needs Chicago as a through point, and Vincent needs Maran's money to fund the transition. He paused. When that partnership makes it into the news, and it will, because Moran's operation in Detroit was compromised 3 months ago, and the federal investigation is moving west. Every name associated with Vincent's organization will go into the filing. The parking structure was very quiet. Reyes said, How do you know about Detroit? Because I've been awake for 11 days and I've been doing nothing but asking questions. Lucien looked at him steadily. I have documentation, financial trails, communications intercepts, the partnership terms. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. Reyes's eyes moved to Marcus, to Elena, back to Lucien. What do you want from me? He said. 48 hours of neutrality. Don't commit to Vincent. Don't move against either side. In 48 hours, I'll have enough consolidated to make you an offer that doesn't come with a federal investigation attached to it. Reyes was quiet for what felt like a very long time. 48 hours, he said finally. That's all. Reyes nodded once. His men moved, and he moved with them, and they were gone down the ramp before the sound of footsteps faded. Marcus exhaled. Elena, who had been standing 3 feet to Lucien's left during the entire conversation and watching Reyes's hands the way she watched patients' hands when she wasn't sure what they were going to do, let her own shoulders drop slightly. That worked, she said. Partially, Lucien said. He turned toward the car. His left side caught. She saw it, the fractional falter in his stride, quickly corrected. And she moved in without thinking, her hand going to his arm, and he accepted it without comment, which told her more about his actual condition than anything the morning had produced so far. They made it back to the car. She got in the driver's seat. He got in the passenger side and sat for a moment with his head back against the headrest and his eyes closed, breathing carefully, and she watched him in her peripheral vision without making it obvious. "The documentation you mentioned," she said, starting the car. "The financial trails. You actually have those?" "Some of them." He opened his eyes. "Marcus has been building the file since month 2. The Detroit information is real. The rest is partially constructed." She pulled out of the parking structure and into the gray morning. "So you bluffed?" "I made a reasonable projection based on available evidence." "That's a more sophisticated way of saying the same thing." "Somewhat." He shifted in the seat, careful with his left side. "Reyes doesn't know which parts are solid and which aren't. By the time he figures it out, the solid parts will have been enough." Elena drove. After 4 blocks, she said, "What happened in month 3? The month where Marcus says Vincent moved on the first of your lieutenants." He turned his head to look at her. She kept her eyes on the road. "What makes you ask about month 3 specifically?" "Because you know this organization the way I know an anatomy chart. You know where everything is and what it does and how it connects. But when Marcus went through the timeline last night, there was something in month 3 that both of you stepped around." She changed lanes. "I noticed." Lucien was quiet for a full block. "There was a woman," he said, "inside the organization. Not an operative, so someone I trusted personally. Vincent used her to access internal communications during months 2 and 3. By the time Marcus identified the breach, the damage was done." "Did she know what she was doing?" "Yes." "Where is she now?" His voice didn't change. "She's not a factor." Elena didn't push it. She filed it. They were 20 minutes from the safe house when Marcus called. She heard Lucien's side of the conversation, the way his voice went flat halfway through, the way his right hand closed on the door handle without pulling it. "When?" he said. Marcus said something. "How many?" More from Marcus. "All right." He ended the call. Elena waited. "Vincent sent a team to the clinic," Lucien said. "The one on the west side. Ose's clinic." Her hands tightened on the wheel. "They took the staff," he said. 4 people. Ose is one of them." The city moved past the windows. Ordinary morning traffic, ordinary gray November sky, people going to work and coffee shops, and all the ordinary machinery of a day that had no idea what was happening inside it. "He's using them," Lucien said, "as leverage. He sent a message to Marcus 20 minutes ago. He wants me to present myself at the warehouse on Kinsey by noon, or he starts—" "Don't," Elena said. "Elena, don't finish that sentence and don't even consider doing what he's asking." Her voice was completely level. Her hands were not shaking on the wheel. She was aware of both of these facts and found them strange. Because if you walk into that warehouse, it ends one way. And if Ose and the others are alive right now, it's because they're more valuable to him as leverage than as casualties. The moment that leverage is gone, I know how it works. Then you know going there doesn't save anyone. He said nothing. She drove. She was thinking about Amara Ose in her coat with her reading glasses on the beaded chain, locking the front door of the clinic with the same unhurried competence she brought to everything. She was thinking about the man who'd had a piece of rebar in his thigh and made no sound while she removed it. She was thinking about 40 to 60 patients a week who came to that basement because there was nowhere else. "How many people do you have?" she said. "Right now, consolidated, loyal, available. Enough for a defensive position, not enough for a direct assault on a fortified—" "I'm not asking about a direct assault. I'm asking what you have." She looked at him. "Because I'm about to help you figure out how to use it. And you should know before we start that I'm not doing this for your organization or your war or any of the things you've built. I'm doing it because Amara Ose taught me something in 6 months that most people never learn, and she is not going to die in a warehouse on Kinsey Street because I saved the wrong man's life." The sentence hit the air and stayed there. Lucien looked at her for a long moment. "You didn't save the wrong man," he said. "I don't know that yet," she said. "I'm still figuring it out." She turned the car back toward the safe house. Behind them, somewhere in the city, Vincent Doran was sitting in a room with 4 hostages and a clock he believed he controlled. He didn't know yet that Elena Mercer had made her decision. He didn't know that the decision meant she was no longer a loose end. She was something he had no category for. A woman with a medical bag, no fear of blood, and the specific focused anger of someone who had been patient for 6 months and had finally run completely out of patience. She pulled into the safe house drive. She turned off the engine. She sat for exactly 3 seconds with her hands in her lap, and in those 3 seconds she understood with perfect clarity that the life she'd had 6 months ago, the credential, the shift schedule, the apartment with the letter on the counter, was not coming back unchanged regardless of how any of this ended. Then she got out of the car and walked into the house to figure out how to take apart whatever Vincent Doran thought he'd built. The operations room smelled like cold coffee and the particular tension of people who hadn't slept. Elena stood at the map table and looked at the marked locations and did what she did in the trauma bay when the situation outpaced the resources. She stopped looking at what she didn't have and started building from what she did. Marcus laid it out without being asked. 11 men, consolidated and loyal, 3 vehicles, 2 safe positions on the north side, 1 on the east. The warehouse on Kinsey was a former cold storage facility. 3 levels, reinforced loading doors, 2 exterior access points that they knew of, and probably others they didn't. Vincent had been using it for 6 months as a secondary operations hub, which meant he knew it and they didn't. "How long has he had Osei?" Elena said. "The call to Marcus came in at 6:48, Lucian said from the chair. She'd made him sit. He'd argued for approximately 45 seconds and then sat, which told her the left side was worse than he was admitting. If they moved on the clinic at dawn, they've had them roughly 2 hours. "Is there a pattern to how Vincent handles hostages?" Marcus looked at her. The question was clinical and direct, and she could see it surprised him. "He doesn't usually take them," Marcus said. "This is unusual." "Because he's desperate," Lucian said. "Because he's smart," Elena said. Both men looked at her. "Desperate people make loud moves. This is quiet. He's not trying to destroy you. He's trying to end this cleanly, before the federal investigation Marcus mentioned makes noise and everyone associated with Chicago organized crime becomes a person of interest." She pressed 2 fingers to the map over the Kinsey location. "He needs you to walk into that building because a public war is bad for his new partnership with the Moran Group. He needs this to look like a transition, not a coup." "A corpse is a corpse," Marcus said. "A corpse in a warehouse that nobody finds for 3 weeks is a transition. A war in the streets is a problem." She looked at Lucian. "He's counting on you to come to him. He set this up so that you feel like you have to." "I do have to," Lucian said. "Those are my people in that building." "They're not your people. They're Osei's people. And Osei's people are mine, and that's exactly why I'm the one who's going in." The silence that followed had a specific quality, the kind that comes after someone says a thing so plainly that the room needs a moment to accept it as real. Marcus said, "That's not—" "Think about it," she said, and her voice had the tone she used when a patient was arguing against their own treatment, which was patient and implacable and completely unwilling to shift. "Vincent's threat architecture doesn't include me. I'm a loose end he was planning to clean up quietly. Not a combatant, not a known operative, not someone his people are briefed to treat as a tactical threat. I walk up to that building as a civilian trying to negotiate access to hostages, and I am the last thing he expects. You'd be walking into a fortified position with no backup and no— I'd be walking in with information," she said, "and a phone, and the fact that Vincent Doran does not know what I look like." That landed. Marcus turned to Lucian. Lucian was looking at Elena with an expression she couldn't fully categorize. Something between assessment and something else. Something with more weight in it that she chose not to examine directly. "He doesn't know your face," Lucian said slowly. "You said it yourself. I'm not in his threat architecture. He knows my name. He knows I'm a nurse who was at the hospital. He's been treating me as a potential witness to manage, not an active problem to monitor." She paused. "How many women do his people see going in and out of operational locations?" "None," Marcus said. "Or civilian contacts. Medical, occasionally. Legal. So a woman with a medical bag, arriving at a location where he's holding people who have medical needs, is not inherently suspicious." Marcus looked at the map. Back at her. "You'd need a reason to be there that holds up for 30 seconds of scrutiny." "I'm a doctor," she said. "Or close enough for 30 seconds. Vincent's men aren't going to run my credentials. They'll search you." "Then I won't carry anything they can't search." She picked up the coffee cup in front of her, found it empty, set it down. "I go in. I make contact with Osei and the others. I assess what we're dealing with, how many guards, what positions, what the layout actually looks like from inside. And then I find a way to communicate that back to you. And if Vincent is there himself, then I talk to Vincent. The room was very quiet. Lucian said, Elena. What? He's not a reasonable man in a pressured situation. I know that. She looked at him directly. Neither are you. Neither is anyone in this room. I've been working with unreasonable people under pressure for 11 years. It's basically the job description of emergency nursing. She held his gaze. I'm not naive about what I'm walking into. I just happen to be the best option available. He held her gaze for a long moment. You'll need an earpiece, he said finally, and a story that doesn't require more than 30 seconds of verification. I know. And if it goes wrong, then it goes wrong and you do what you were going to do anyway, which is bring 11 men and 3 vehicles and try to pull it apart from the outside. She picked up a pen from the table. So let's stop wasting time and figure out my story. They gave her 90 minutes. In that 90 minutes, Marcus produced a medical bag, real, properly stocked, the kind that a clinic physician might carry for a house call, and briefed her on everything they knew about the Kinsey warehouse's exterior. She studied the sketch he drew from memory. She asked questions. She memorized the answers. Lucien sat at the table across from her for most of it. He didn't watch her the way people watched someone they thought was going to break. He watched her the way he'd watched Reyes in the parking structure, taking inventory, mapping the discrepancy between the expected and the actual. At one point, while Marcus was on the phone, he said, "Why did you become a nurse?" It wasn't quite a question, more like something he'd been sitting with. "Because I was good at it," she said, without looking up from the building sketch. "That's not a reason, that's a result." She looked up. "My father had a heart attack when I was 16, she said. "At home. We didn't call anyone for 8 minutes because we didn't know what we were looking at, and we were afraid to make it worse." She paused. "He survived. But those 8 minutes, the difference between what we did and what someone who knew what they were doing could have done. I spent the rest of high school thinking about those 8 minutes." She looked back at the sketch. "I didn't want anyone else to be standing in a room not knowing what to do." He was quiet for a moment. "And yet you ended up in a trauma bay with a crime lord bleeding out on your table." Emergency medicine is full of surprises. She thought she heard him exhale something that might, in a different context, have been a laugh. She left at 9:45. The driver took her to within 3 blocks of the Kinsey warehouse, and she walked the rest of it, the medical bag over her shoulder, her breathing deliberate and even, her eyes moving the way they moved when she walked into a chaotic scene and needed to read it fast. The November cold pressed against her face. The neighborhood was industrial, loading areas, chain link, the skeletal infrastructure of commerce that didn't want to be observed. The warehouse announced itself by what surrounded it. A vehicle parked at an angle that blocked the sightline from the street. 2 men near the loading dock who were dressed to look like they weren't working security. The specific quality of stillness around a building that had people in it trying not to look like people. She walked up to the man nearest the door with the directness of someone who was where they were supposed to be. "I'm the medical contact," she said. "I was told there are people here who need assessment." The man looked at her. He was large, mid-30s, with the flat eyes of someone who had evaluated threats for long enough that evaluation had become the only register he operated in. He looked at the medical bag, at her face, at the bag again. "Nobody told me about a medical contact," he said. "Somebody told somebody," she said. "I got a call at 8:15. 4 individuals, potential medical needs, someone needed them looked at before things progressed." She held his gaze without blinking. "I don't know what your situation is here, and I don't need to. I'm here to do a job and then leave. If you want to call up the chain, call. But I've got 2 other visits after this, and I'm not standing on a dock in the cold while someone figures out their communication failures." A beat. He took out his phone, stepped away. She watched him in her peripheral vision, the call, the brief exchange, the return. "Bag," he said. She opened it. He went through it with a professional thoroughness that told her he'd done this before, pulling items, checking seams, running his hands along the lining. The earpiece was in her left ear, seated deep, the kind used for hearing assistance that looked unremarkable in a cursory search. He found the earpiece and looked at it. "Hearing aid," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. He handed the bag to her. They took her inside. The interior of the warehouse was what the sketch had suggested, and also what no sketch could fully convey. The scale of it, 3 levels of steel grating and exposed concrete, the cold that lived in spaces like this regardless of season, the way sound moved through the structure and told you things about what was behind walls you couldn't see. She clocked it all in the first 20 seconds, which was as long as she could justify looking like she was taking it in before she needed to focus on the person walking her toward the back of the ground floor. 4 people in a room behind a partition of chain link and a padlocked door. She saw them through the chain link before they opened the lock. Ose first, recognizable by the posture, the particular way she held herself even sitting on a concrete floor with her hands in her lap. 2 of the clinic's volunteers whose names Elena knew. One she didn't recognize, that middle-aged man, visible injury to his face, clearly from something that had happened during the taking. Ose looked up when the door opened. Her expression did not change. This was one of the things Elena had always found remarkable about Amara Ose, the absolute absence of wasted emotion. She was sitting on a concrete floor as a hostage in an active criminal operation, and she looked at Elena with the same calibrated attention she brought to everything, reading the situation in Elena's face and posture and the way the guards positioned themselves. And she said, "Jules," Elena said to the guard. He stayed in the doorway. She moved to Ose first, crouching down, opening the bag, taking out the blood pressure cuff. She put it on Ose's arm and leaned close to read it, and she said very quietly, against the noise of the cuff, 8 men on this level, 2 more upstairs. I need the layout. Ose said, equally quiet. Storage room left of the main floor. 1 guard. The other 3 are rotating. She looked straight ahead, as though the BP reading required her attention. Vincent arrived 20 minutes ago. He's on the 2nd level. Elena recorded a number in her notebook. She moved to the next person, a young volunteer named Carmen, 26, who had a cut on her forehead from the initial struggle and whose hands were shaking in the specific way that adrenaline crash produced. Elena cleaned the cut methodically, took her pulse, spoke to her in a level voice about pressure and breathing. "You're doing fine," she said, not to comfort her, because it was true, and Carmen needed to know the truth more than she needed false reassurance. She worked through all 4 in 12 minutes. When she stood and turned back to the guard, she had a reasonable picture of the ground floor. 8 men on the lower level, 2 more above, 1 isolated in the storage room, Vincent Doran on the 2nd level. 4 hostages, 1 with a minor head injury, all ambulatory. She needed to get the information out. She said to the guard, "The older woman needs medication. I have it in my bag, but she needs to take it with water, and I need to confirm she takes it correctly. Can I get water?" He looked at her. She looked at him. He left to get water. She turned back to the room, to Ose, and she had 30 seconds. "Storage room left of the main floor," she said, fast and quiet. "Is that a loading access?" "Roll door," Ose said, padlocked from inside. "Key?" "Guard has it on his belt." Elena processed this. "When you hear noise from the south side of the building," she said, "get everyone flat on the floor and stay flat until someone specifically tells you to move. Not shouting. Specifically. You understand?" "Yes." Ose looked at her steadily. "Elena, we're getting you out." "That's not what I was going to say." The older woman's voice was composed and very quiet. "Be careful what you become in the next few hours. This kind of urgency, it changes the way things look. Don't let it change what you actually are." Elena looked at her. "I'll try," she said. The guard came back with a paper cup of water. Elena administered a meaningless supplement from her bag with professional gravity and packed up and thanked the guard in the neutral tone of someone completing a task, and she was walked back through the warehouse floor, counting positions, noting the guard in the storage room corridor, clocking the 2nd-level staircase, and out through the loading dock. She walked 2 blocks and turned into an alcove between buildings and said, into the air near her left ear, "I'm out. I have the layout." Lucian's voice came back immediately. "Talk." She talked. The plan they built in the next 45 minutes was not elegant. Marcus said so plainly, sitting in the vehicle parked 6 blocks from the warehouse. Looking at the sketch Elena had revised from memory, while Lucian listened and his jaw worked. "It's not elegant," Marcus said. "We're hitting a fortified position with information that's 45 minutes old. Interior positions will have shifted." "Some will have shifted," Elena said. The primary positions won't. The storage room access is stable. That's structural, not personnel. She looked at the sketch. The south approach creates the distraction. Marcus takes 4 men through the roll door once the guard is managed. Lucien comes in through the main approach with the remaining team once the south side is compromised. That splits Vincent's attention and his resources simultaneously. Who manages the storage room guard? Marcus said. A pause. I'll go back in, she said. Elena. Lucian's voice. I already went in once. I have a reason to return. I forgot to leave written instructions for the medication. She looked at him. He was in the back seat, and in the vehicle's close space, she could see the cost the morning had been extracting from him. The color of his face, the way he'd been holding his left arm slightly away from his body for the last hour. And before you tell me you'll do it, I need you to be honest with yourself about what your left side can manage right now. The muscle in his jaw moved. 70%, he said. Then you stay with the main approach, and you don't go in until the south door is open. She held his gaze. I am not going to have kept you alive twice so you can tear your aortic repair walking through a loading dock. He held her gaze for a long moment. The guard by the storage room, he said. He'll search you again. I know. If he finds something on you he didn't find the first time, he won't. Elena. I said he won't. She looked at Marcus. What's the timing on the south approach? Marcus checked his watch. Noon was Vincent's deadline. If we're moving, we move before noon. He'll be expecting an answer, and when he doesn't get one, he adjusts. I'd say 10:30 at the latest. It was 9:58. 30 minutes, she said. 30 minutes, Marcus confirmed. She got out of the car. Lucian got out behind her. She heard the door and turned. He was standing in the street in the cold, not leaning on the vehicle, holding himself upright by the specific force of will that she'd seen in the trauma bay. A man whose body had better ideas than he was willing to accept. I need to say something, he said. 30 minutes, she said. I know. He looked at her. If this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, he held her gaze. What you did in that trauma bay, the decision you made when every other person in that room stepped back, you need to understand what that meant. Not to me, to the people who've come through that clinic in 6 months. The 40, 60 people a week who had somewhere to go because a nurse with a flagged credential didn't stop working. He stopped. That matters regardless of what happens in the next hour. I wanted you to know I know that. Elena looked at him for a moment. Her throat did something she didn't fully authorize. When this is over, she said, I'm going to need you to stop saying things like that and let me be irritated with you about the discharge against medical advice situation. There are things I need to say about that. Something broke open briefly in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close and real in a way that the careful composure wasn't. When this is over, he said. She turned and walked back toward Kinsey Street. What? The second approach went smooth for the first 90 seconds. The same guard at the loading dock. The same medical bag. She told him she'd forgotten to leave written instructions, produced a handwritten sheet from her bag that she'd written in the vehicle, held it up as evidence. He looked at it, looked at her, searched the bag again, waved her in. The interior had shifted in 45 minutes, as Marcus said it would. 2 of the ground floor guards had moved. One position she'd clocked near the east wall was now empty. She walked toward the chain link room with the authority of someone completing an interrupted task, and she noted the changes and filed them, and she kept walking. The storage room corridor was where she needed to be. She made a wrong turn. Deliberate. She went left instead of right, past the chain link room, down a corridor that led toward the storage room, and she slowed her pace and looked at the clipboard Marcus had put in the bag as though she was checking a name or a room number, and the guard at the storage room looked at her. Wrong way, he said. I know, I'm sorry. She turned back. I was looking for... Is there a supply room down here? I was told there was a supply room. No supply room. Okay. She looked at the clipboard again, started to turn. He stepped into the corridor to redirect her, which put him 3 feet from her. She hit him with the only thing she had, which was the full medical bag swung with both hands at the side of his head, and it connected badly, not where she'd aimed, catching his shoulder more than his temple, but it knocked him off balance, and she moved in the way she'd moved in trauma bays for 11 years, which was fast and without hesitation. And she brought the bag down a second time, Harder, and this time it connected properly, and he went down. Her hands were shaking. She took the key from his belt. She did not look at him for more than a second. He was breathing. That was enough. And she went to the roll door and put the key in the padlock, and her hands shook badly enough that it took 3 attempts to get it open, and then she had the lock off, and she was pulling the roll door up, and the cold November air and the sound of the street came in all at once. She pressed her hand to her ear. "South door is open," she said. 30 seconds later, she heard Marcus. She heard the building change, the quality of sound shifting as 4 men came in through the roll door, as the ground floor rearranged itself in the specific violent way that happens when people who know what they're doing move through a space with purpose. She went back to the chain link room. She unlocked it. She said, "Floor, now, all of you." Ose got flat. Carmen got flat. The other 2 got flat. Elena crouched at the doorway with the medical bag in her lap and listened to the building happening around her. Shouts, impact, 1 gunshot that made her compress into the doorway wall, then 2 more from a different direction. The sound of boots on metal stairs, the 2nd level. And then a door she hadn't expected opened at the far end of the corridor. Vincent Doran was not what she'd imagined. She hadn't spent much time imagining him. She'd been focused on what he represented rather than what he looked like. But the man who came through that door was smaller than the mythology suggested. Compact, well-dressed even now, with the specific kind of control in his movement that came from someone who had learned to make his size irrelevant. He was alone. He had a gun. He looked at Elena, at the open chain-link door, at the 4 people on the floor. His eyes went back to Elena and she watched him calculate. "You're the nurse," he said. "Yes," she said. "You walked in here twice." "Yes." He looked at the bag in her lap, the shaking in her hands, which she'd stopped pretending wasn't happening. "You're not armed." "No." "Then why are you still sitting there instead of running?" She looked at him steadily. "Because if I run," she said, "you might decide the people behind me are more useful as problems than as leverage." He looked at the 4 on the floor, back at her. "Smart," he said, and pointed the gun at her. The building crashed open from the main floor approach. She heard Lucien's voice, the first time she'd heard him raise it, and it had a quality she hadn't predicted, something that cut through the ambient chaos the way a clear tone cuts through noise. And Vincent's eyes moved for half a second toward the sound. She threw the medical bag at his face. It wasn't enough to disarm him. She knew it wasn't going to be. But it bought a second, and in that second she was flat on the floor inside the chain-link room, pulling the door, and the shot that came went wide and hit the corridor wall and left a ringing in her left ear that lasted for days. Then boots in the corridor. Then Lucian in the doorway of the chain-link room, breathing hard, left side visibly wrong, looking at Elena on the floor with an expression that went through several things in about a second and a half. "Vincent," she said. "Handled," he said. "Ose." "I'm fine," Ose said from the floor, in the exact tone she used when told to rest during a long shift. "I'm perfectly fine. Will someone help Carmen up?" They were clear of the building by 11:40. Ose's clinic people went with Marcus in the first vehicle. Elena rode with Lucian in the second, and for the first 7 minutes of the drive, nobody said anything. Then Lucian said, "You threw a medical bag at an armed man." "It was the best available option." "You threw a medical bag at an armed man," he said again, as though repetition might produce a different level of understanding. "The bag has a metal clasp," she said. "It's heavier than it looks." She looked out the window. Her hands had stopped shaking somewhere around the 5-minute mark. "How bad is Vincent?" "He'll live." A pause. "He'll wish he hadn't for a while." "Your left side." "I know." "On a scale of 1 to, I know," he said again. She looked at him. His face was composed and pale, and there was a line of sweat at his temple that had no business being there in November. "We're going directly back," she said, "and you're going to let me look at it properly." "Yes." The word came out without argument, which told her everything. She looked back out the window. The city moved past, ordinary and indifferent, carrying its ordinary November business. The clock on the dash read 11:47. 13 minutes before Vincent's deadline would have expired. She thought about Amara Ose on the floor of the chain-link room, composed as furniture. Be careful what you become in the next few hours. She thought about that. She thought about this guard in the storage room corridor, the bag swinging, the specific sound of the impact, and the way her hands had moved without her consciously deciding to move them. The same way they moved in the trauma bay, fast and without hesitation. And she wasn't sure yet what it meant that the two things felt so similar. She thought about Vincent Doran's face when he'd looked at her and said smart, and the gun coming up. She thought about Lucian's voice cutting through the building. "Hey," Lucian said. She looked at him. "You all right?" She considered the question. "Ask me in 20 minutes, she said. He nodded. They drove. She found the tear in his side 40 minutes after they got back. He was sitting on the edge of the bed in the room Marcus had given him, the largest one, closest to the operations center, chosen for proximity rather than comfort. And he was holding himself with the specific stillness of someone who had learned that movement made things worse and stillness made them manageable. He had his shirt off without being asked, which told her the pain had reached the level where pride became irrelevant. She pressed 2 fingers along the surgical repair and felt the wrongness of it immediately. The particular resistance of tissue that had been stressed past its tolerance, the heat that shouldn't be there, the way he exhaled through his nose when she hit the exact point. "You tore it, she said. "I know." "At the warehouse." "Probably before that." He looked at the wall. "The parking structure meeting with Reyes. There was a moment when I moved fast and I felt something. I thought it was muscle." "It wasn't muscle." "No." She worked in silence for a few minutes, cleaning, assessing, trying to calculate what she was dealing with without imaging equipment or a surgical team or any of the things she would have had at Mercy General. What she had was the medical bag, and 11 years of emergency training and the specific focused anger of someone who had already watched this man nearly die once and had strong feelings about repetition. "How bad?" he said. "You need a hospital." "Not an option." "I know it's not an option. I'm telling you anyway so that we're both clear on what you're choosing to do instead." She pressed a clean pad against the site, held it with firm pressure, reached with her other hand for the tape. "The repair is partially compromised. Not fully. If it were fully torn, you'd know in a way that would end this conversation. But partial means it's unstable, and unstable means any significant physical exertion in the next 24 to 48 hours is a coin flip." He turned his head to look at her. She looked back. "A coin flip," he said. "Between managing it and not managing it." "Yes." She taped the pad in place with the same precise movement she used on every patient in every condition, because precision was what you had when everything else was uncertain. "So you're going to sit here while I talk to Marcus, and when I come back we're going to figure out what the next stage of this looks like without you charging through buildings. Vincent is handled for the moment. You said so yourself." "Handled isn't finished." He said it quietly, but with a flatness underneath that she was beginning to understand was his particular register for things he considered non-negotiable. "He has people we haven't reached yet. The Marin partnership. If that infrastructure activates while he's contained, it activates without him, and we lose the leverage point. The next 12 hours are as important as anything that happened today." She put the tape down. "Then talk me through what needs to happen," she said, "and we figure out which of those things require you to be physically present and which ones don't." He looked at her for a moment. "You're not going to tell me to rest." "I just did." "You're not going to do it. I'm adjusting." She picked up the medical bag. "Talk." And Marcus had the intelligence on the Maran group spread across the operations table when she came down. Printed documents, handwritten notes, the map with new markings in a different color than before. He was on the phone when she entered, and he ended the call when he saw her face. "He's stable," she said. "Relatively." "What's the Moran situation?" Marcus set the phone down. "The Detroit investigation that Lucian mentioned to Reyes, it's real and it's moving. Our source inside the federal structure says they're looking at Chicago connections, which means anyone in contact with the Moran group in the last 6 months is going to surface in those filings." He paused. Vincent understood this, which is why he accelerated the timeline. He needed the transition to look complete before Chicago showed up in federal documents. With him contained, the Moran Group is sitting on a partnership that has no functioning Chicago counterpart. Which means what for us? Which means they're going to want to resolve that. Marcus looked at the map. They have 2 options: walk away from Chicago entirely or find someone else to partner with. He looked at her. There's a third option that we need to take seriously. They try to resolve it by eliminating the obstacles, which right now is Lucian. She absorbed this. They don't have local infrastructure, she said. No, but they have money, and money buys local contractors. And we have had people in this organization whose loyalty is still uncertain. He laid a photograph on the table. A man she didn't recognize, 50s, nondescript, the kind of face that appeared and disappeared in rooms without leaving a mark. This is Edvard Crane, Moran's fixer. He flew into Chicago 4 hours ago. The room felt colder. They already know Vincent is contained, she said. They know the noon deadline passed without resolution. They'll have drawn conclusions. Marcus looked at the photograph. Crane doesn't negotiate. He's operational. She looked at the photograph. She thought about a coin flip. She went back upstairs. Lucian was standing at the window when she came in, which meant he'd moved against her explicit instruction, and she opened her mouth and closed it again because the view through the window, the lake, gray and restless, the tree line stripped bare, had something in it that made her understand the standing was not restlessness but something else, the particular stillness of a man taking inventory of the thing in front of him. Crane is here, she said. He turned. I know. His voice was even. Marcus told me while you were downstairs. You knew while I was assessing your side. I found out while you were downstairs. I sent Marcus the question while you were working. He moved back to the chair, carefully, holding the left side, sitting with a controlled lowering that cost him. Crane's presence changes the calculation. It removes the 24-hour window you had to stabilize. Yes. He laced his hands together and looked at them. The Moran Group has 3 contractors they use in the Midwest. I know who 2 of them are. The third I've been trying to identify for 2 years. Does it matter which one they've hired? It matters for predicting the method. He looked up. Crane prefers contained actions, clean, fast, limited collateral, which means he's not going to hit the safe house with a team, too visible, too complex on unfamiliar ground. He's going to find a way to bring the target to a specific location, lure you out, or create a situation where staying here becomes less safe than moving. He paused. Reyes. She looked at him. The 48 hours of neutrality I asked for, he said. If someone reaches Reyes and tells him the situation has changed, that Vincent is contained but the organization isn't stable, that the Moran Group is now the dominant force in the calculation, Reyes might decide that his 48 hours of neutrality needs to end early. And if Reyes moves against you, we lose the eastern boundary and we're exposed on 2 sides. He said it the way she said things about anatomy, not with emotion, with precision. Marcus and I have 7 consolidated men at this location. That's sufficient against a direct assault if we're dug in. It's not sufficient if we're caught in transit. So we stay here. We stay here. His eyes moved to the window. And we wait for Crane to make his move, and we have a better position than he expects because we know he's here. He looked back at her. I need to make one call, to Reyes, before Crane does. Can you do that safely? Marcus has a clean line. He stood again. She made herself watch without intervening because she'd filed the information about the coin flip and understood that the next decision belonged to him, and that understanding it belonged to him was not the same as not having feelings about it. I need 30 minutes to make that call and brief Marcus on what I know about Crane. Then I need you to look at this side again. You're already moving too much. I know. He met her eyes. 30 minutes. She looked at him. 20, she said. He moved toward the door. Ciao. She sat in the chair he'd vacated and looked at the lake through the window. She thought about Amara Osei, who was now 2 miles away in a location Marcus had arranged, who had looked at Elena leaving the clinic vehicle and said quietly, I'll be here when it's done. Not be careful, not come back safe, just the calm, factual statement that she would be there, the way a fixture is there, immovable. She thought about what Osei had said in the warehouse. Be careful what you become in the next few hours. She held her own hands in her lap and looked at them. They were still. They had stopped shaking somewhere between Kinsey Street and the safe house, and they hadn't started again. She thought about what that meant about the person currently sitting in this chair versus the person who had stood in a trauma bay 6 months ago with a gun pointed at her and kept her hands in a man's chest. The same hands. She was relatively sure they were still attached to the same person. She heard raised voices from downstairs. Not arguing. The particular raised voice quality of people communicating urgency across a space. She was on her feet before the content of what they were saying reached her, and she was at the top of the stairs when Marcus appeared at the bottom, looking up at her with the expression she'd learned to read in the last 24 hours as the specific face he made when the situation had moved faster than the plan. "Reyes," he said. "He called us before Lucian could reach him. He says someone already contacted him, an hour ago." She came down the stairs. "Crane." Not Crane directly, through an intermediary. Marcus was already moving toward the operations room. Reyes was offered protection by the Moran Group, guaranteed position in the new structure. "All he has to do is provide the location of this house." She stopped. "Does he know the location?" she said. "We transported him here for the meeting 2 days ago." Marcus's voice was careful and controlled, and underneath it something was working hard to stay controlled. "He was in the vehicle for the approach. Even if he wasn't watching the route, he was watching the route," she said. "Probably." She looked at him. "What did he say to the offer?" "He said he needed to think about it. Then he called us." "Why would he call us if he was going to take the offer?" "Maybe he's not taking it. Maybe he's managing both sides until he knows which one is safer." Marcus spread his hands. "Or maybe he called us so that he could tell Crane's intermediary that he'd warned us, which muddies the water around his own culpability if things go wrong." He paused. "There's also the possibility that he's genuinely still neutral and actually trying to tell us something useful. I don't know which it is. That's the problem." The operations room. Lucien on the phone. She could hear him, the low measured voice, the absence of wasted words. She stood in the doorway until he looked up and saw her face. He said into the phone, "Hold." Then to her, "I heard." "Reyes called you?" Marcus patched it through. He stood, the phone still at his ear. "We need to move." "You said moving was the vulnerability. Staying is worse now. If Reyes decides in the next hour that the Moran offer is better than our offer, this location is compromised. We need to be somewhere else before that decision lands." He said into the phone, "Marcus is going to give you coordinates. Be there in 40 minutes. He ended the call. She looked at him. "Coin flip," she said. "Yes." He moved to the table and started pulling the marked map. "There's a secondary position on the North Shore, 20 minutes from here. More defensible than this, better approach sight lines, fewer access points." He looked at Marcus in the doorway. "Call it in. We move in 10. 10 minutes. She went upstairs and repacked the medical bag with the specific economy of someone who'd gotten very good at knowing what she needed and what she could leave. She could hear the house moving around her, men preparing, the sound of vehicles being positioned, the hydraulic compression of urgency that she recognized from mass casualty events at the hospital when everything narrowed to the next necessary thing. She came down with the bag and found Lucien at the front door looking at the drive. "I need to be next to you in the vehicle," she said. "All right. If anything changes, your breathing, the pain level, anything, you tell me immediately. Not after you've managed it for 5 minutes, immediately." "Yes." She looked at him. "You've done this before, running like this." "Once or twice." He glanced at her. "Have you?" "Not exactly like this." She looked at the drive, where the first vehicle was already moving. "But the principle is the same as a bad shift. You keep moving and you deal with each thing as it presents, and you don't look too far ahead because too far ahead will stop you." He looked at her. "Where did you learn that?" 4 years in the ER. She moved toward the door. "Come on." "What?" They were 8 minutes from the North Shore position when the first vehicle's radio burst. She heard it from the back seat, fragments, compressed, urgent, and she watched Marcus in the front passenger seat go very still and then very deliberate, which was its own kind of alarm. "Say again," Marcus said into the radio. The voice on the other end said it again. Marcus turned to Lucien. "The North Shore position," he said. Crane got there first." The vehicle went quiet. The driver kept driving, keeping the pace even, not reacting, which was correct and professional, and indicated he'd been told what to do in exactly this scenario. And Lucien was looking out the window at the passing landscape with his jaw tight and his hands still, and some calculation running behind his eyes that she couldn't read. How? Lucian said. One word. Unknown. It might have been Reyes. It might be that Crane already had someone on the North Shore as a backup position. If he's been operational since arriving this morning, he's had time to… How many at the position? Source counted 4 vehicles. Could be 8 to 12 men. Our resources. 7 here. 2 at the South House we kept back. Marcus looked at the road ahead. We don't have the numbers for a head-on approach to a position they've had time to dig into. No, Lucian said. We don't. Another silence. Elena was looking at the map folded on the seat beside her. The one from the operations table. The one with all the markings. Her finger found the North Shore position. Found the Kinsey warehouse. Found the safe house they'd just left. Found a 4th location, marked only with a number, near the industrial waterfront on the south side. She looked at it. What's this? She held the map where Lucian could see it, her finger on the numbered mark. He looked at it. An old position. We haven't used it in 3 years. Cold storage, industrial waterfront. It's not… He stopped. Crane doesn't know about it, she said. If his intelligence is coming from Reyes, and Reyes only knows what he's been told in the last 48 hours, then Reyes doesn't know about it either. Lucian looked at her. It's old infrastructure, not maintained. 1 viable access point, no backup power. It's not defensible, Marcus said. It's unknown, Elena said, which right now is worth more than defensible. She looked at Lucian. We need a place to land for 2 hours while you figure out what you actually have left. You can't do that from a vehicle. Lucian looked at the map. The waterfront position, he said to the driver. The driver adjusted course. The cold storage building was everything Lucian had said, and less. A large, dark, unheated space that smelled of salt and rust, and the particular staleness of a place that had been sealed for a long time. The one viable access point was a side door that Marcus's men secured within 3 minutes. The interior was concrete and steel and shadow, with the lake audible through the walls. They set up in what had been an office space off the main floor, a room with walls and a door, which was more than most options available. Someone produced a flashlight. Someone produced a second one. Elena found a table with 2 legs that required the third man to stand with his hand against it to keep it level, and she put the medical bag on it and told Lucian to sit on the crate beside it, and he sat. She looked at his side in the thin flashlight beam. The pad she'd taped in place at the safe house was darker than it should be. She pressed carefully. He exhaled through his nose. More than I thought, he said. Yes. She worked quickly, replacing the pad, maintaining pressure, recalculating the timeline in the clinical part of her mind that kept running regardless of what the rest of her was doing. You have 2 hours before this becomes a decision I can't manage without a surgical team. I want you to understand that. 2 hours, he said, to stabilize your position enough that we can move you to something with actual medical infrastructure. Not a hospital. I know that's not the option, but somewhere I can do more than this. She taped the new pad in place. So use the 2 hours. He looked at her in the flashlight light. Why 2 hours? Marcus said from the doorway. Because after 2 hours, the blood loss will affect his cognitive function, and I need his cognitive function available for whatever is about to happen. She picked up the flashlight and looked at Marcus. What do we have? 7 men here. 2 at the south position I can pull in 30 minutes. He looked at Lucian. Reyes called again while we were in transit. And, Lucian said, he's asking for a meeting, in person. Says he has information about Crane's operation that he won't give over the phone. The old cold storage building breathed around them, the lake pushing against its walls. It's a trap, Elena said. It might be, Lucian said. Crane used the North Shore information that came from Reyes. Now Reyes wants an in-person meeting. The sequence is… I know what the sequence looks like. Lucian's voice was quiet. It might also be that Reyes looked at what Crane did with the information he provided, used it to box us in, not to finish it. And he's calculating that Crane's endgame leaves no good position for anyone who helped him get there. He looked at Marcus. Does Reyes have a stake in the Moran partnership beyond a promise of protection? No financial stake, no operational role that's been established. Marcus paused. If the Moran Group finishes this and moves into Chicago formally, Reyes becomes a local operator under a structure he has no equity in. That's a worse position than what he has now. So he might actually have information, Elena said. He might. Lucian looked at his hands. Or he's holding the door open for Crane. Then you don't go to the meeting, she said. You send someone. Both men looked at her. Someone Reyes doesn't know. Someone who isn't in his picture of this organization. She looked at Lucian. Someone Crane hasn't flagged as a target because she's not on any operational list in this entire situation. A beat. No, Lucian said. I've already been inside a hostile location once today. You had a cover story and an entry point and 45 minutes of preparation. A meeting with a man who may be actively running you into a kill position is different. I know it's different. She looked at him steadily. But you have 2 hours and 9 men and a position that Crane doesn't know about yet, which means the window where you have any kind of advantage is closing. The meeting with Reyes is the fastest way to determine whether your 2 hours get spent preparing a move or buying time for someone to locate this building. The flashlight on the table between them threw harsh shadows across his face. Elena, he said. Not a question. Not a preamble. Just her name. In the voice that carried the specific weight of someone who'd learned in the last 24 hours that the name meant something it hadn't meant 48 hours ago. She held his gaze. I need a location that works for you, she said. Somewhere Crane can't control the approach. Somewhere I can get to from here without passing through his known positions. She looked at Marcus. Do you have a map of Crane's confirmed locations? Marcus pulled a folded paper from his jacket. She spread it on the table with the other map and looked at both of them together. The gap between Crane's known positions and the waterfront building described a corridor. Narrow, not clean, but passable. There was a location at the northeast edge of it, a diner that appeared on the city map as an ordinary business, that sat in clear sight of 2 different departure routes and had the advantage of being the kind of place where a woman arriving alone didn't raise anything. Here, she said, and put her finger on the map. Lucian looked at it. He looked at her. I'll have Marcus 2 blocks out, he said. I know. And you carry... He stopped. He looked at the medical bag. He looked at what he'd been about to say and made a decision not to say it. I know what I'm walking into, she said. You knew what you were walking into the first time too, he said, in the trauma bay. And I was right about that. He held her gaze for a long moment. You were, he said. She picked up her jacket. Outside the cold storage building, the lake moved against the industrial waterfront with the low, continuous sound of something that had been going longer than any of this, and would go on considerably longer after it ended. And Marcus was already on the phone arranging the outer position, and the flashlight on the table threw their shadows long and crooked against the concrete wall. And Elena Mercer zipped her jacket and picked up the medical bag and walked toward the door. Behind her, Lucian Voss pressed his hand against his left side and stood. The diner was called Polly's, and it had been there since 1987, and it smelled like coffee that had been sitting since morning and bacon grease that had been sitting since considerably before that, and Elena walked into it at 2:47 in the afternoon and took a booth near the window that gave her a sight line to both exits and ordered coffee she didn't intend to drink. Reyes arrived 11 minutes later. He came alone, which surprised her. He stood in the doorway for a moment, scanning the room the way people who had been careful for a long time scan rooms, and when his eyes found her, there was something in them that was neither relief nor calculation, but some specific compound of both. He came to the booth and sat across from her and looked at her face. You're the nurse, he said. The same words Vincent had used in the warehouse, and she noted the repetition without reaction. Yes. He sent you. I volunteered. She looked at him steadily. You have something to tell us. Reyes put both hands on the table, flat, palms down, the deliberate display of a man showing he wasn't holding anything. Crane has 12 men, not 8 to 12. I was told 12 confirmed, 4 vehicles, and a secondary team that flew in this morning that I didn't know about until an hour ago. He paused. The secondary team has your North Shore position and your safe house and 1 more location that I gave them. She looked at him. I gave them 3 locations, he said. The 4th, the waterfront building. I didn't give them, because I didn't know about it. His jaw tightened. And I want you to understand that distinction. You gave them 3 locations, she said. Yes. Including the North Shore. Yes. The coffee arrived. The waitress set it down without looking at either of them and walked away. Elena didn't touch the cup. "Why are you here?" she said. "Because Crane's secondary team is moving on the waterfront building," Reyes said. "In approximately 40 minutes. Someone talked. Not me, not anyone I know, but someone in the last 2 hours identified that building as a possible fallback, and Crane's people have been triangulating positions since noon." He leaned forward. "I didn't know about the fourth team until 30 minutes ago. The moment I found out, I called Marcus, and I'm here now. To warn us. To warn you." He held her gaze. "I made decisions in the last 24 hours that I made, for calculated reasons that no longer calculate the way I thought they would. Crane isn't building a structure here. He's burning one down and leaving ash. Every person who helped him get access to your positions becomes a loose thread after the job is done. I've been in this city for 23 years. I'm not interested in being someone else's loose thread." Elena thought about this. "How confirmed is the 40 minutes?" she said. "My source is inside Crane's operational team. The confirmation came 22 minutes ago." He looked at his watch. "Which means you have less than 40 minutes now." She was already reaching for her phone. Us. Marcus picked up before the first ring completed, which meant he'd been holding the phone. "I know," he said. "We got the same information 6 minutes ago from a different source. We're moving. Lucien is mobile, barely, but mobile. We're pulling out the south exit. Elena, where are you?" "The diner. Reyes is here." A pause. "Is he? He warned us. Both of the same information independently. That's either confirmation he's legitimate or a very sophisticated layering." She looked at Reyes across the table. "I'm going to make a judgment call." "Elena, he comes with us," she said. "He knows Crane's team composition and positioning. That's more than we have." Another pause, longer. "The secondary rendezvous," Marcus said. "You know the location, I mean." She hadn't been told a secondary rendezvous. Then she remembered, 2 nights ago, in the operations room, a location Marcus had marked in pencil and then erased. The mark had left an impression in the paper. She'd seen it without noting it consciously, the way she cataloged things in her peripheral vision without deciding to. "Yes," she said, because she trusted her own memory, and she trusted that Marcus had given her the information for exactly this kind of moment. She hung up. She looked at Reyes. "You're coming with us," she said. "You ride with me. If anything you've told me doesn't hold up in the next hour, that's a problem for you, not for me. Clear?" He looked at her. "Clear," he said. She left cash on the table for the untouched coffee. The secondary rendezvous was a garage on the northwest side, 3 bays deep, owned by a man named Sutton, who had been in Lucian's organizational orbit for a decade, and whose involvement was limited to property, and who asked no questions. They arrived 11 minutes before Lucian and Marcus, which gave her 11 minutes to sit in the cold garage and look at Reyes and think. She was thinking about Crane's 12 men and the 40 minutes that had now become 26. She was thinking about a compromised location and 9 men against a professional operational team that had already demonstrated it could move faster than they'd anticipated. She was thinking about a coin flip. Lucian came through the garage door moving faster than his left side should have allowed, and she stood and assessed him in the 3 seconds before he reached her, paler, the controlled walk breaking down at the edges, a tightness around his mouth that was pain beyond what he'd been managing. And she put her hand on his arm and he let her, which was the most alarming data point of the last 6 hours. "Sit," she said. He sat on a workbench. She opened the bag. Behind her, Marcus and Reyes were talking, low, fast, the specific compression of 2 men trading intelligence. And she tuned it to the background register and focused on the wound, which had progressed further than she'd hoped and less far than she'd feared. And she worked with the flashlight and the last of the clean supplies she'd been rationing since the warehouse. "Crane is moving on the waterfront," Lucian said. "I know, they won't find anything. They'll know we were there. Recent." He exhaled slowly as she pressed the wound. "He'll adjust." What does he do when he adjusts? He consolidates, brings everything to one position, and waits for us to come to him. He paused. "Which we'll have to do." She looked up. "Why?" she said. "Because by tonight, every resource I have left in this city is going to be making a decision about the next 12 hours. If Crane is still operational by morning, if the Moran Group has a functioning presence and Vincent is contained but I'm not visibly intact, the people who've been sitting neutral start moving towards safety. And safety, in that calculation, is not me." He met her eyes. I have one more move, and it has to happen tonight. She held his gaze. Your one more move, she said. What does it cost? Me going somewhere I probably shouldn't go in the condition I'm probably in. He said it plainly, without drama. And everyone we have left. She pressed the last pad in place and taped it. Then tell me what I need to do, she said. The plan came together in 40 minutes, in the back of Sutton's garage, with Reyes providing the interior intelligence and Marcus mapping the approach, and Lucien directing from the workbench with a focus that she watched burn through the physical cost like fuel, each minute of clarity purchased at a price she could see accumulating in the lines of his face. Crane had consolidated, as Lucien predicted, at a location on the river, a converted industrial space that the Moran Group had used as a transit point in past operations, and that Crane knew therefore as functional and defensible. 12 men, 2 internal levels, 2 approach routes. Their resources, 9 men total, 3 vehicles, the element of the unknown. He doesn't know our numbers, Marcus said. He's been triangulating positions, not personnel. His count of our forces is probably high. He'll have built-in margin for error. So he thinks we have more than we do, Elena said. Which means he's prepared for something larger than we're bringing, Reyes said. Which means his interior positions are configured for a larger assault. He paused. A smaller force hitting a specific point rather than a broad approach would find gaps. The north vehicle entrance, Lucien said. It's the access point that benefits least from broad defensive positioning. 1 vehicle, 4 men, moving like they're making a delivery. If Crane's outer positions are looking outward for a large approach, they look through a small one, Marcus said, until it's too late to reposition. She looked at the sketch Marcus had drawn from Reyes's description. She found the north vehicle entrance. She found the internal layout, the second level where Crane would be, the single staircase. She looked at Lucien. You're not going in, she said. Elena, you're the one person in this equation that Crane needs to confirm. If he confirms you're contained or dead, the Moran Group completes their transition, and everything that happened today means nothing. If you go in and something goes wrong, she stopped. You're the leverage. You stay back until the second level is secured. He looked at her for a long time. And the staircase? He said. She didn't answer immediately. I'll go in with Marcus, she said. My job is the staircase. I create the gap and Marcus takes it. That is not... You said you have one move. She held his gaze. This is mine. The garage was very quiet. Marcus looked at his hands. Reyes looked at the sketch. The other men, stationed at the garage entrance, looked at nothing specific. Lucien looked at her with the expression she'd seen him cycle through in the last 2 days. The assessment, the calculation, the thing underneath both of those that he didn't name and she didn't name, and that had been sitting in the space between them since she'd kept his wrist in her hand on a blood-soaked gurney and told him, I've got you. You come back, he said. Not an order, not quite a request. I know, she said. The north vehicle entrance to Crane's river position accepted a single-panel van at 9:47 in the evening without incident because the 2 men on the outer approach were looking at a sightline that assumed 6 vehicles, not 1, and the one that came was moving at a speed that matched a working vehicle and not an assault. And by the time the recalculation happened, Marcus had the outer positions managed, and the van was through. Elena went in through the service door at the ground level while the outer positions occupied Crane's attention, and she moved through the interior with the same quality she moved through a trauma scene, fast, low, reading every space for information, filing what mattered, and leaving what didn't. The staircase was where Reyes had said it was. 2 men at the base. She didn't have a weapon. She had the medical bag, the metal clasp, and the specific quality of a woman appearing in a location where no tactical calculus had placed a woman, which bought approximately 3 seconds of recalibration before the threat was assessed. She used the 3 seconds. The bag caught the first man across the jaw. She had her full weight behind it this time, both hands, the swing coming from the shoulder. And he went sideways into the wall and she was already moving, because the second man's reaction time was good, and she knew she wasn't going to hit him the same way. She caught his arm instead, the one holding the weapon, and she held on with the grip she'd developed in 11 years of moving patience who outweighed her, and she held his arm against the wall and she held it there while the sound came from outside the staircase that meant Marcus had arrived. The second man made a decision, and it was not the right one. and Marcus came through the door, and the staircase was cleared, and Elena stood against the wall with both hands braced on her knees, and her breath coming in hard pulls, and her ears ringing, and the medical bag on the floor at her feet, still buckled, the clasp intact. "Up," Marcus said. She picked up the bag. She went up. Edvard Crane was at the top of the staircase behind a door that had been reinforced in a way that told her the Moran Group had used this space before for exactly this kind of situation. Marcus took 4 minutes and a crowbar to get through it, and in those 4 minutes she heard movement inside the room and shouting in a language she didn't know, and 2 gunshots that hit the door from the inside and left dents that she looked at while she breathed. The door came open. Inside, a large space, windows overlooking the river, 3 of Crane's men in positions that had been set for the wrong direction, and Edvard Crane himself at a table with a phone to his ear, and the expression of a man who has been told the wrong thing about every element of the situation he believed he controlled. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Elena. He looked at the medical bag. He said something into the phone and lowered it. "You're the nurse," he said. It was the 3rd time in 2 days she'd been identified that way by someone pointing a weapon at her, and she filed the consistency of it somewhere between exhausted and almost amused. "Yes," she said. "You walked up those stairs." "Yes." He looked at the bag again. "What's in that bag?" "Medical supplies." She looked at his men. 3 of them, positioned badly, caught mid-reorientation. Marcus's men were at the door and at her back, and the math was not clean, but it was not impossible. "And I'll tell you the same thing I told Vincent Doran, which is that I'm not armed, and I'm not a combatant, and the person you actually need to have this conversation with is about 40 seconds behind me." Crane's eyes moved to the window. He was calculating escape. She could see it, the specific quality of a man looking at what was still available to him. The window. The phone call he'd just ended. The men who were no longer in the positions he'd set them. "It's over," she said. Not cruelly. Just the information, the way she gave information to patients who needed to understand what they were facing. "The outer positions are gone. Your communications are being monitored. The Moran Group is going to wake up tomorrow morning to a federal filing that names every Chicago contact they've had in the last 12 months, and the name at the top of that list is yours." She held his gaze. "You can make this worse, or you can make it stop. That's the only decision you have left." Crane looked at her. He looked at the phone in his hand. He set it on the table. Behind her, she heard the sound of Lucian Voss coming up the stairs. The particular rhythm of someone moving at full effort through compromised capacity. The careful management of each step that was itself a form of controlled violence. He appeared in the doorway with Marcus 1 step behind him and his left hand pressed against his side and his face composed into something that was neither fury nor satisfaction, but the specific flat finality of a thing that has reached its conclusion. He looked at Crane. Crane looked at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Edvard," Lucian said. "Lucien." Crane's voice was level. "You look like hell." "I've been told." Lucian came fully into the room. He moved to the table and stood across from Crane and looked at him with the same eyes he'd used on Reyes in the parking structure, measuring the space between what had been promised and what was actually present. "The Moran Group. Call them off." "I can't call off a federal investigation." "I'm not talking about the federal investigation. That runs its own course." Lucian held his gaze. "I'm talking about whatever remains of the operational structure here. Call it off. Tonight. Everything that's still moving stops moving." Crane's jaw tightened. "And if I don't?" "Then I call them myself," Lucian said, "using the documentation I have on their Chicago operation, including the partnership terms and the financial structure and the Detroit connection. And I make that call to someone who will make sure it arrives at the federal level before morning." He paused. "Which ends the Chicago partnership regardless. It just ends it with considerably more damage to the Moran Group's global operations than a quiet withdrawal would." The room was very still. Crane looked at the phone on the table. He looked at Lucien. He looked finally at Elena. The woman with the medical bag and the metal clasp, and the specific grounded stillness of someone who had been standing in rooms with impossible situations for 11 years and had developed a particular relationship with the moment when the situation resolved. He picked up the phone. He made the call. It took until nearly midnight to confirm. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall outside the room where Lucian and Marcus and Reyes worked through the confirmation, call by call, position by position, the unwinding of a 12-man operation that had moved fast and was now being required to move in the opposite direction. She sat with the medical bag in her lap and her head back against the wall and her eyes closed, and she listened to the river through the windows and the low voices through the door. And she thought about nothing specific because her brain had finally reached the edge of what it would do on demand and had sat down. Marcus found her there at 11:40. He crouched in front of her the way people crouched in front of someone they weren't sure was all right. "It's confirmed," he said. "Crane's team is standing down. The Moran Group has formally withdrawn from the Chicago arrangement. The federal filing, the one on the Detroit investigation, went in an hour ago. Every name attached to the Chicago partnership is in those documents." He paused. "Vincent Doran is at the top of that list." She opened her eyes. "Vincent," she said. "He'll be in federal custody within 24 hours. The material we compiled from the last 6 months, the financial trails, the communications, was transmitted to the investigating office an hour ago." Marcus's face held something that wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite grief, but occupied the territory between them. "It's done." She looked at him. "And Lucien," she said. Marcus's expression shifted. She was on her feet before he finished the sentence. She saw him starting to form. "Surtout." I was in the chair by the window. She knew as soon as she came through the door, knew from his posture, the way he was holding himself, the way his breathing had changed into the pattern she recognized from the trauma bay, the one that said the body was working harder than the available resources justified. She crossed the room and crouched in front of him and put 2 fingers on the pulse at his wrist. His eyes opened. Before you say anything," he said. "I'm not saying anything yet." She was counting. The pulse was fast and weak, and the skin around his mouth had the particular gray-white she associated with serious things. "How long?" 20 minutes, maybe 30. He looked at her. "I knew before we came up the stairs. And you came up anyway." "Crane needed to see me standing." He said it simply. "There's no version of tonight where I don't come up those stairs." She looked at him. She thought about telling him what she thought about that decision. She decided to save it. "Marcus," she said over her shoulder. "Already calling," Marcus said from the doorway. She opened the bag. She worked for the next 19 minutes with the same focused economy she'd used in every difficult room she'd ever been in, except that her hands were not entirely steady, and she didn't try to make them so, because steadiness was a performance, and she was done performing things tonight. She worked with the actual hands she had, which shook slightly and were precise anyway, because those 2 things had always coexisted in her, and she'd stopped apologizing for the first one years ago. He watched her work. He didn't look away. At one point he said quietly, "Elena, still working." "I know." A pause. "I know you are." The vehicle that Marcus had arranged arrived 15 minutes later. Not a hospital, but the next closest thing. A physician who owed Lucien the kind of debt that couldn't be repaid with money, and who had a facility on the north side that was more than what it appeared from the street. She rode with Lucien in the back and kept 2 fingers on his wrist the entire way and watched his face in the ambient light of the passing city. He was conscious, barely, at the edges, but present. At one point he turned his head and looked at her and said, "The clinic." "Ose is fine," she said. "The clinic is fine." "I know." He looked at the ceiling of the vehicle. "I want to rebuild it, properly. Permanent location, actual infrastructure." He paused. "If she'd let me." "She'd tell you what to do with your money." "Probably." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "Then I'd do it anyway and let her be angry about it." "That sounds like you." "Yes." He looked at her. "I want you to run it." She looked at him. "Not my clinic," he said. "Yours. What you decide it is. What you decide it needs." He held her gaze, and his eyes were clear in the way that things are sometimes clear at the edge of whatever comes next. "You said you became a nurse because of 8 minutes, because of what someone knowing what to do could have changed." His voice was quiet and without performance. "Build the thing that means nobody else sits in a room not knowing what to do." She looked at him for a long moment. Her throat did the thing she didn't authorize. "Ask me again," she said, "when you're not trying to stay conscious. I'll ask you every day until you say yes." "That sounds exhausting." I have time, he said. Now. She looked out the window at the city moving past. The late-night version of it. The version she'd driven through more times than she could count, coming home from doubles and sitting with her own silence. It looked the same. She looked different, she thought, or felt different. She wasn't sure those were separable. You have time, she said quietly. He closed his eyes. She kept 2 fingers on his wrist. Whoa. The physician's name was Dr. Calloway, and he was 67 and unhurried in the way of people who had seen enough to know that hurrying changed almost nothing about the outcomes that mattered. He worked for 2 hours while Elena sat in a room adjacent to the procedure space, and Marcus sat across from her, and neither of them spoke for most of it. At some point, Reyes appeared. She didn't register when, and sat along the far wall with his jacket over one knee, looking at nothing specific, present in the specific way of a man deciding something slowly. At 2:14 in the morning, Calloway came out. Stable, he said. He looked at Elena with the expression of a physician looking at another medical professional and deciding to tell the truth. The repair held, barely. He's going to need actual surgical follow-up in the next 72 hours, and I mean a facility, not a workaround. He paused. And I mean rest that actually looks like rest, not 2 days of running a tactical operation. I'll communicate that, she said. I'm sure you will. He looked at her hands. You should let me look at those. She looked down. Her left hand had a cut across the palm she hadn't noticed acquiring, probably the garage door or the staircase, or any one of the moments in the last 12 hours when she'd been putting her hands on things without monitoring for personal damage. All right, she said. He sat across from her and cleaned and closed the cut with the efficient gentleness of a man who'd learned gentleness the hard way, and she sat still and let him. And outside the window of the room, the Chicago night moved toward 3 in the morning, and the lake moved against the city the way it always had. She saw Lucien at 7 in the morning. He was in the bed in the room Calloway had prepared. Proper bed, proper equipment, the particular relief of a space that was actually built for what was happening in it. And he was awake, which surprised her less than the fact that he was quiet. Not the controlled quiet of a man managing something, just quiet. The way a room is quiet when nothing is required of it. She sat in the chair beside the bed. He looked at her. She looked at him. Calloway's conditions, she said. Surgical follow-up at a facility. 72 hours. I know. And rest. I know. Actual rest. I want to be specific about the word actual. She held his gaze. No phones for the first 12 hours. No operations briefings. No... Elena. She stopped. He was looking at her with the expression that she was beginning to understand was his version of something that other people did with more obvious machinery. The particular quality of attention that meant the words were about to carry more weight than words usually carried. The clinic, he said. I told you to ask me when you weren't trying to stay conscious. I'm conscious. She looked at him. She thought about the 8 minutes, the granola bar she'd never eaten, the letter on the counter, the cold tile of the kitchen floor, and Grace's voice on the phone saying, I know. She thought about Amara Osei on a concrete floor in a chain-link room, reading the situation in Elena's face. She thought about 2 fingers on a wrist at 3 in the morning, counting. Yes, she said. He held her gaze. Yes, she said again. More certain this time, because she'd learned from 11 years in emergency medicine that certainty was not the absence of fear, but the decision to proceed anyway, and she had made the decision before she'd said the word the first time, and the second time was just the record catching up with the fact. Something settled in his expression, something that had been held against the possibility of a different answer. Calloway's conditions, he said. Yes. 72 hours. And then we talk about the rest of it, she said, properly, with full cognitive function available. She reached into the medical bag and produced the small notebook she'd carried through everything, the one she'd started filling in the first night at the safe house, vitals and observations, and the accumulating record of a body she'd been managing through conditions no body was designed for. She set it on the table beside the bed. That's the record of the last 4 days. When you want to know what it actually cost, medically speaking, it's in there. He looked at the notebook. I know what it cost, he said. I know you do, she said. I'm still making you read the record. She stood, picked up the medical bag. looked at him for a moment in the morning light that was coming through the room's single window. Thin, winter gray, the particular light of a city that had gotten through another night. "Sleep," she said. "You too," he said. She went out. Marcus was in the hallway with 2 cups of coffee, one of which he held out to her. She took it and drank half of it standing in the corridor, and he waited with the patience of a man who had learned that some things needed to finish before they could be discussed. "Reyes," she said, "he's agreed to testify. Voluntary cooperation with the federal investigation, Vincent's operation, the Moran connection, the Chicago approach, in exchange for structured consideration of his own situation." Marcus looked at the floor. "He made the call at 4 in the morning. I don't know what changed his mind." She thought about Reyes in the garage, looking at the sketch. In Sutton's garage with his jacket on his knee. In the corridor at 2:14 with the particular expression of a man deciding something slowly. He saw what Crane's version of Chicago looked like, she said, and he decided he didn't want to live in it. "Maybe," Marcus looked at her. "And your credential situation, the license, Finch's statement." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded paper. The documentation from the hospital, the anonymous donation, the foundation, the connection to Vincent's financial structure, it was included in the federal filing. The Credential Board will receive a formal notification by the end of the week. She looked at the paper. She didn't unfold it. "You don't have to do anything with it today," Marcus said. "I know." She finished the coffee. "What about the clinic, the West Side space, Osei's situation? The lease is paid through the end of the year. Lucien arranged that before the North Shore move, one of the calls he made in the operations room." Marcus paused. "Osei knows." She was not effusive in her response. "No," Elena said. "She wouldn't be." She stood for a moment in the corridor with the empty coffee cup and the folded paper and the medical bag and the cut on her left palm covered in Calloway's clean bandaging, and she felt the particular weight of the last 4 days settling. Not the heavy, crushing weight of something that had gone wrong, but the different, denser weight of something that had been carried a long distance and could now be set down. Not everything. Not all of it. There was still the conversation about what came next, and the facility visit, and the Credential Board notification, and the 1,000 decisions that would have to be made about the shape of whatever this was going to be. But the acute phase was over. She recognized the moment the way she recognized it in the trauma bay, the quality of the room changing when the immediate crisis had passed, and what remained was the long, slower work of repair. She put the folded paper in the medical bag. She would read it later. "Get some sleep, Marcus," she said. "You too," he said. She walked to the end of the corridor and found a chair near the window that looked north, toward the lake, toward the part of the city where an underground clinic in a basement was still operating because a woman named Amara Osei had decided 62 years ago that fear was an unaffordable luxury and had simply stopped carrying it. She sat. She put the medical bag on her lap. She looked at the city in the thin winter morning, and the city looked back the way it always had, indifferent, enormous, continuous. And somewhere in it, Vincent Doran was waiting for something that was coming for him. And somewhere in it, Edvard Crane was on a plane back to somewhere he would have to explain himself. And somewhere a federal filing was moving through the system with names attached to it that had needed to be attached to something for a long time. And in a room down the corridor, a man who had spent 6 months learning to breathe was sleeping. She closed her eyes. She didn't go to sleep immediately. She sat for a while in the particular stillness of after the running, after the cold warehouses and the flashlight and the coin flip and the stairs, after 2 fingers on a wrist counting, after yes. She thought about what Osei had said in the chain link room. Be careful what you become in the next few hours. She thought about what she had become. She had thrown a medical bag at 2 armed men. She had walked into a hostile building twice with a cover story and a metal clasp. She had kept 2 fingers on a man's pulse at 3 in the morning in a moving vehicle and counted beats, the way you count the things you are not willing to lose. She had said yes to something she hadn't fully mapped, which was not how she usually said yes to things. She thought she was still the same person who had stood in a trauma bay 6 months ago and refused to step back. She thought that person would recognize what she'd done and why. She thought the 8 minutes were still in there. Her father's kitchen, the specific helplessness of standing in a room not knowing what to do. and that everything since had been the answer to that. The window light shifted. Somewhere below, the city moved into its morning. She let it. She finally slept.